Chapter 269. We are the federal police. May I ask if they threatened you? After a few Italian police officers surrounded them, one of them pointed at the people at his feet and asked Rinpoche. It was in Italian. Rinpoche was at a loss. He looked at the ID that the other party flashed and thought for a while. He should be saying that we have defeated someone and wants us to follow them to the police station? Which eye of his saw us hitting people? Rinpoche didn't know if he was talking to himself or to the Empress, but he sounded a little doubtful. Rinpoche knew his situation very well. Both of them did not even have passports and were burdened with cases. If they were to enter the police station, they would have no choice but to fight their way out. There was no need to enter the police station. With a few more questions from the police, the two of them would give themselves away. He would have to kill his way out sooner or later, so it was better to strike first and gain the upper hand. It was a pity that he had only been in Milan for half a day and had yet to take a look around. Damned fishing law enforcement. Rinpoche cursed in his heart. All of a sudden he leaped up and stomped his feet on the ground. In an instant he appeared in front of the police officer and gave him a tight slap on his ear. Rinpoche's current strength was around 330 kilograms, which was considered quite strong. That police officer did not even have the chance to groan before he was smashed to the ground like a wooden stake. The police officers were stunned by the sudden turn of events. What was going on? The rest of them hurriedly reached for their holsters, but before they could pull out their guns, they were all sent flying. The onlookers were also stunned. A middle-aged man in the crowd had a satisfied look on his face. He had sent people to monitor the route from the north to Milan, and sure enough, the two of them had arrived. He had guessed their route and destination, so he had come here in advance to wait for them. Knowing that the two of them were extremely vicious, he was afraid that they would get into trouble again. He even hired a few Italian police officers to help them clean up the mess. This was to prevent the two of them from escaping after committing a crime like they did in Japan. This could be considered as a sign of his sincerity. However, he had guessed the beginning correctly but not the ending. When he saw Rinpoche suddenly slap the police officer, the expression on his face froze in an instant. In the next second, the police officers were all lying on the ground, unconscious. He almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Don't you feel any pressure at all when you openly attack a police officer? Do you still have a little bit of conscience? Can you guys share the good stuff? Are you going to fight all over the world? Did they really think that the country was useless? Well, some countries in Europe were indeed incompetent. The middle-aged man looked like he was about to vomit blood. Seeing that Rinpoche and Gu Shijio were about to leave, he hurriedly chased after them and asked, "Can I have a word with you too?" Rinpoche and the Empress ignored him, turned around and left. The people around them made way for the two of them. That middle-aged man chased Rinpoche for half a street. Rinpoche suddenly stopped, and his hand was already on his waist. The middle-aged man was startled by Rinpoche's actions. He consciously raised his hands to show that he had no ill intentions and said, "I'm here to help you." Rinpoche pulled up his pants and grinned at him, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. "I'm here to help you. Can we talk? I'm not representing myself." "You know what I mean," the middle-aged man said quickly, afraid that the other party would lose their minds. "I'm not free," Rinpoche replied. "If the two of you are worried about the Italian police, our men will take care of those police officers," the middle-aged man continued. When Rinpoche heard this, he felt that it was somewhat interesting. "They are the undercover agents that you planted here?" Rinpoche's face was full of vigor. The middle-aged man almost spat out a mouthful of blood. "Recently we have done a lot of things to help you clean up the mess you left behind. Otherwise, do you think that the Japanese police wouldn't be able to find out about the two of you?" The middle-aged man continued and pointed to a coffee shop by the roadside. "The two of you, sit down and have a chat." Rinpoche looked at the Empress, but she didn't care about this at all. Her gaze was focused in the distance. Rinpoche followed her gaze and saw a bright display window. There was a floral skirt paired with a red top. "All right, you look more pleasing to the eye than the previous few." Rinpoche nodded. In any case, the other party had helped him clean up a lot of messes. Furthermore, he didn't have much money on hand. If they could come to an agreement, would he be able to transfer the 20 million yuan to Qingqing? After a while, the three of them sat in the coffee shop. "Let me introduce myself first. My surname is Qin Shi," the middle-aged man introduced himself. At the same time he sized up the two of them. Rinpoche, male, 25 years old, Han Chinese, graduated from SY University, then worked at SY Zhongqing Trading Company for 8 months. All the information was clearly remembered in his mind. However, at this moment, Rinpoche looked completely different from the delicate and slightly reserved young man in the photo. Compared to the photo, he was much more robust, bald, and gave off a very strange vibe. On one hand, he didn't seem to care much about anything. On the other hand, he gave off a very sharp vibe. At the same time, there was a little shadow of his previous self. As for the other person, Qi Zixiao, female, unknown. Other than her name and gender, everything else was unknown. It was as if she had popped out from a crack in a rock. After all, for a person like her, it was impossible to hide her looks, temperament, and strength. Especially when she was sitting there without saying a word, she gave off a little pressure. It was as if she was someone who held the power of life and death for a long time. It was impossible for such a person to have popped out from a crack in a rock. However, he couldn't find any information about her. It was a complete blank. It was these two people who had committed so many crimes in their country. After escaping to our nation, they didn't restrain themselves at all. Along the way they went sightseeing and committed murder after murder. In their eyes, human life was like grass. According to the recent investigation, a murder in Austria should be related to these two people. Oh. Rinpoche nodded and stirred his cup with a small spoon. The Empress hugged her yogurt and slurped it in small mouthfuls. Qin Shi waited for a long time, but the two of them didn't have any intention to continue the conversation. He looked slightly helpless. "Those Italian police officers just now were helping you," Qin Shi finally said. "Oh, I thought they were arresting us," Rinpoche said innocently. Qin Shi looked at Rinpoche's innocent expression and felt his chest tighten. "Couldn't you have asked more? There were so many people around. As long as you opened your mouth, someone would immediately tell you what they were talking about. Furthermore, I was standing right beside you. Who would have thought that you would make a move in front of so many people without saying a word? I knew that you would stir up trouble here. I specially bribed a few police officers to help me clean up the place. I was afraid that you would stir up trouble again," Qin Shi said with a sullen face. Rinpoche nodded. He thought that the police and robbers had encountered a fishing expedition. "However, you are disturbing me from picking up money." Seeing that Rinpoche was indifferent and Qi Zixiao was focused on drinking yogurt, Qin Shi felt even more sullen. "How much work have we done for you? Bribing the Italian police and interfering with our nation's investigation. We have done all these things that we shouldn't have done. Don't the two of you know what to do?" If it was someone else, he would have already slammed the table. However, he really didn't dare to do so in front of these two people. The other party would definitely turn hostile and leave. He didn't know how long it would take to find them again. If he angered them, they would shoot him and continue to escape. He believed that they would definitely do such a thing. These two people were extremely daring. Chapter 270. Let's get down to business. Qin Shi cleared his throat and said seriously. "Both of you aren't going to continue like this, are you? If not for someone helping you deal with the loose ends, I'm afraid both of you wouldn't be so relaxed now." The Empress sneered when she heard this. After staying in this world for so long, she really didn't think that anyone could do anything to her. Although there were indeed powerful weapons in this world, she wasn't a blockhead. Most importantly, if she wanted to kill someone who could escape. Most importantly, she didn't belong to this world at all. Qin Shi knew what Qi Zixiao was thinking when he saw his expression, but he didn't mind. Instead he said, "Both of you think the country is too simple. Perhaps conventional means can't do anything to you, but there are many unconventional means. If necessary, for example, if our nation finds out that you are different, they may not use too much force, but other means are hard to defend against. For example, poisonous gas, chemical incapacitating agents, infrasonic weapons, there are too many. Now, it's no longer the world where individual strength is supreme. There are too many new weapons that are hard to defend against. Perhaps it's difficult to equip the entire army or use them on the battlefield, but it's possible to deal with a small number of targets. To put it simply, every bite of food you eat may contain something that can threaten you. For a cake like this, perhaps only the middle layer had a little bit of something. You won't even know how you got hit." The Empress stuffed the cake into her mouth expressionlessly. Rinpoche thought about it carefully. Part of what Qin Shi said was right. One should not underestimate the power of a nation. The power that any nation could mobilize was unimaginable to them. However, other things were easier said than done. However, there was one thing. If there was an opportunity, he and the Empress would be in big trouble. Although there were a lot of people who fled and lived freely in other countries for decades, the premise was that the country didn't really care about them. If the country really cared about a person, then what Qin Shi said might happen. One could be a thief for 1,000 days, but one couldn't guard against thieves for 1,000 days. It was impossible for him and the Empress to not relax at all, unless they ran to a desolate and uninhabited place. Then they had to be careful of a bomb that dropped from their heads. Of course, the Empress wasn't someone to be trifled with. If she wanted to kill someone, unless that person wasn't on Earth, no one could escape. Therefore both sides were afraid of each other. But the most important thing was that he wasn't prepared to keep floating outside. Previously they had no choice but to run away. If they had the chance to live a stable life, no one would choose to run away. In fact, he and the other party hit it off very well. Furthermore, I believe that there must be a reason behind your escape this time. Judging from your previous actions, you did not rely on your strength to challenge the law or affect social order. We've also investigated the Jin family and learned some of their style. There must be a reason why they appeared in your house. As for your temperament, we have more or less understood it, Qinshi said to Rinpoche. He did understand a little. In those cases in Japan, almost all of the victims were skinheads, ultranationalists, and almost all of them had various criminal records. If no one provoked the two of them would not make trouble out of nothing. However, if someone provoked the two of them, there was nothing they wouldn't dare to do. Just like what had been said before, their guts were boundless. At least that was the case before. If Qinshi hadn't found the two of them in Milan, he probably wouldn't have thought this way after a few days. Rinpoche looked at the other party's words. Since the other party had already built a ladder for him, of course he had to step down. He immediately put on an aggrieved expression. He was almost at the point of perfection in changing his expression. Who did I provoke at home? I stayed at home obediently, but trouble came from the sky. Not only did that Jianghu rob me of my shares, but he also threatened me with my family. I was also forced to do so. What was that saying again? When an ordinary man gets angry, blood will splash 5 steps away. Then, you exterminated the entire Jin family. Qinshi smiled bitterly. This was really a case of an ordinary man getting angry. It's not like you don't know what kind of style they have. They had already threatened me with the lives of their family. When I saw this, if calling the police was useful, they wouldn't be alive and kicking. They are rich and powerful, while I am just a little b*tc. I thought about it and decided to sacrifice me for the happiness of thousands of families. Rinpoche had a look of, I didn't want to do this, but I had no choice. Qinshi was stunned when he heard this. This fellow really knew how to back down. However, it was much easier for him to speak this way. No matter what, murder is still a big crime. However, the nation is very interested in some of the things that you have shown and is willing to give you a chance. The Empress raised her eyebrows and squinted her eyes. Give me a chance. The table under her hand immediately broke into a pile of broken pieces, and everything on the table fell to the ground. When Rinpoche saw the Empress open her mouth, he knew something was wrong. He immediately retracted his leg and was unscathed. On the other hand, Qinshi was spilled with coffee all over his pants. Fortunately, the coffee wasn't too hot anymore. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. He was sweating profusely. The main reason he was sweating was because of the aura emitted by Qi Xiao just now. It made him unable to move, and his heart was beating wildly. It was as if it was about to explode. Before this, he had never thought that a person's aura could be so terrifying. Boss, the quality of the table is too poor. Rinpoche turned his head and shouted. Qinshi was speechless. After a while, the three of them changed to another corner. I remember that you said that you wanted to cooperate? Rinpoche said faintly. Now, all the grievances on his face had disappeared. His expression was similar to that of the Empress, plain and a little cold. It can also be considered a cooperation. Qinshi immediately changed the topic. This guy's expression really changed at a whim. Tell me about the specifics, Rinpoche continued. For example, some of the things in your hands, the laboratory of you and Qinyan. I think you have other things in your hands that are very valuable. For example, the skills of this person. I'm very curious. Are there really legendary cultivators in this world? If so, can they be imparted to others? There are a lot of things that the nation is interested in. I think there are a lot of things that you can give up. In fact, they don't even affect you. At this point, Qinshi's eyes were a little fervent. Rinpoche gently tapped his fingers on the table. In that case, what can we get? We can write off everything that happened in the past, suppress the domestic affairs and revoke the arrest warrant. However, there is a prerequisite. You can't act so recklessly and must abide by the law. At the same time, if you have any other requests, you can raise them. I will report to the higher-ups, Qinshi continued. Qinshi thought for a while and spoke again. Also, did you say emperor, just now? I'm very curious about this person's identity. Just now the Empress said, "Give me a chance." In this half a day he had thought of all kinds of possibilities, but from the tone and the content of the words, he felt that it was Emperor. He felt that there might be a huge secret behind it, and this made him a little excited. The Empress turned her head to look at Rinpoche, then turned her head to the other side to admire the oil painting on the wall. Rinpoche was silent for a while. Then he lowered his voice and slowly said, "Since you have sensed it, then I will say it directly. Actually, she is Wu Zetian. Back then she gave up the throne to cultivate. Now that she has returned from her cultivation, everything in the world has become smoke. However, she still has 1,000,000 soldiers. The nation will lend us 100 million first, and after we unfreeze the 1,000,000 soldiers." Qin Shi looked as if he had eaten **T. Rinpoche pondered for a while. What should he do with 1,000,000 soldiers? He couldn't possibly rebel, right? These words couldn't be said carelessly. After that, we can make a Tang Dynasty terracotta army or something. Chapter 271. Forget about the 1,000,000-strong army. As for the rest, you can guess if I'm telling the truth. Rinpoche spread his hands and said. Qin Shi's mind was filled with the word, Emperor. Those who could say this word were either delusional or... He didn't dare to think about it. If it was someone else, he would have given them a slap. However, the Empress's strength made him overthink. After all, from the current information, the Empress's strength wasn't something a human could achieve. From the video, her speed was twice as fast as a human falling from the sky. It was hard to see her figure clearly and had to be played in slow motion. In other words, a normal person fell from the sky at about 23 meters per second, but she fell at more than 70 meters per second. That was a little more than a second to cover 100 meters. Imagine a person who was 100 meters away 1 second and appeared in front of you in the next. For an ordinary person, it was like teleportation, and they wouldn't be able to react within a short distance. Not to mention, the Empress didn't slow down after carrying Rinpoche. She stepped on the wall and leaped to another building that was 100 meters away. This showed that she was even more powerful. This kind of speed and jumping force wasn't something a human could achieve. Correspondingly, how strong was she? If she was a cultivator, Qin Shi would believe it. If she was a cultivator, how long had she lived? What was her true identity? Qin Shi didn't even dare to think about it. It was really terrifying to think about it. Rinpoche looked at Qin Shi's grave face and was pondering the pros and cons of saying this. If the other party really thought that the Empress was a cultivator, it wasn't that he couldn't produce a secret manual. The secret manuals of Great Xia were enough for them to chew on for a while. Moreover, the lifespan of an earth wheel expert would indeed increase. An earth embryo expert could live up to 100 years, and a spirit wheel expert could live up to 150 years. There was an even higher level above the spirit wheel realm, which was comparable to the Aboriginals' longevity heaven. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that it was a cultivation technique. At the same time, there was an advantage to saying this, which was that the things in his hands could be explained. Otherwise, there were many things that couldn't be explained. As for whether or not it would be exposed, it would have to wait until someone on Earth reached the spirit wheel realm. Rinpoche believed that martial arts wouldn't be widely disseminated in a short period of time. Given the small number of people who practiced martial arts, it would take a long time for someone to reach the spirit wheel level. If Rinpoche didn't remember wrongly, Great Xia's cultivation technique also required some rare treasures. Was there really someone on Earth who could reach the spirit wheel level? Moreover, he was not worried that someone on Earth would cultivate to an extremely high level. On the contrary, if Earth could really find a way to cultivate to a very high level, it was not necessarily a bad thing for him. Perhaps he could push himself to a higher level. Otherwise, he really doubted how far he would be able to go on his own. After all, he was unable to cultivate other techniques, and no one knew what the Rui visualization technique was like. Even though he could smoothly advance to the Earth wheel level, there was still a barrier after that. If he were to stop at the Earth wheel level, the lifespan of an Earth wheel expert was only 100 years. At the same time, because he had traveled between two worlds, due to the difference in the flow of time, his lifespan might be shorter than those who had always been in the other world. The Empress could live to 200 years old, and if she broke through to longevity heaven, she could live to 300 years old. This was very likely. As for whether this would pose a threat to him, he had never worried about this problem. He had the backing of a world, and he would also be rich and powerful on Earth. No matter how bad his situation was, it wouldn't be too bad. It was much better than if he were to stop at the Earth wheel level in the future. At the thought of this, he had an idea and was prepared to make a big lie. Of course he had to do it bit by bit. No one would cherish things that came too easily. Qin Shi, who was sitting opposite him, pondered for a long time before raising his head and asking, "What other requests do you have? You can raise them all at once. I will report to the higher-ups together." "Money. Give me 100 million euros first. I have no money to spend. If you didn't come, I was prepared to rob someone." Ren Baqin spread his hands on the table and finally spoke the truth. Qin Shi pondered for a while. When Ren Baqin ran away, he brought 1 million euros with him, which was only slightly more than 100,000 euros. If he was a little extravagant, it would be gone very quickly. How would the two of them make money after that? Work. To quote a famous saying, it was impossible to work, not even in this lifetime. If the two of them could find a place to work and earn money, he would tear off his head and kick it like a ball. In that case, he was afraid that it would really be like what the other party said. At the thought of this, Qin Shi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. These two people really made him speechless. Forget about 100 million. The country's money doesn't come from nowhere. I can help you settle the domestic affairs. You seem to have money with someone else, right? I don't even have money, how can I cooperate? Ren Baqin retorted. Qin Shi was speechless. He had to admit that the other party was really a bastard. He was representing the country. Could he not be so straightforward? What can you offer in exchange for cooperation? Qin Shi emphasized the word cooperation. Some rare and precious treasures. Ren Baqin pondered about the things from that world. Many of them should be considered rare and precious. After all, they were things from another world. As for whether they were rare or not, he could just change to something else. Furthermore, he still had a killer weapon, the elongation saber. Although this saber was a little weak and would break at the slightest touch, this didn't mean that the elongation saber was worthless. If it could be researched, imagine soldiers fighting with daggers and bayonets and suddenly growing 2 meters. Furthermore, with Earth's technology, they might not necessarily be able to research anything from it. For example, 1 kilogram of iron becoming 1 kilogram of iron? 1 kilogram of gold becoming 1 kilogram of gold? 1 barrel of oil becoming 2 barrels? If she is really an immortal cultivator, will the martial arts of immortality work? Qin Shi asked the question that he was most concerned about. You can't become fat in one go. As for cooperation, let's do it bit by bit. Ren Baqin didn't reject and left some hope for the other party. I need to report to the higher-ups. Please wait a moment. Qin Shi gestured to the two of them and stood up to leave. After he left, the Empress turned her head and asked, "Who is Wu Zetian?" The only female Empress in history, the most famous woman, and much more powerful than most men. Ren Baqin was spouting nonsense just now and hurriedly explained to the Empress now. I am myself. I don't need to impersonate anyone and no one can be compared to me. The Empress looked unhappy. If it was someone else, she would have smashed him into a meat patty. Of course. It's just that you can't tell them about your identity and they have no way of knowing. You are the most unique one. No one can be compared to you, be it in the past or in the future. Just like the words on the mirror, Ren Baqin comforted her softly. The Empress naturally knew that her identity couldn't be revealed in this world. After hearing what he said, she ignored him and turned her dissatisfaction into appetite. She ordered another serving of dessert. After waiting for a while, Qin Shi hurriedly returned. After sitting down, he said, "Someone wants to talk to you. The Europe trip hasn't ended yet." Ren Baqin waved his hand. "A video call will do," Qin Shi said. Ren Baqin nodded. "Let's go to another place. At the same time, we also want to know how strong she is and how strong she is. After all, there are many things that we need to see with our own eyes before we can be at ease." Ren Baqin looked at the Empress. Even though there wasn't much change in her expression, he could imagine that she was very unhappy. He moved closer to her and whispered, "Mortals, let me show you my strength. You should have this kind of thought." His breath tickled the Empress's ear and her body trembled a little. However, after hearing his words, she felt that it wasn't that hard to accept. She just felt that this sentence was indescribably shameful. Qin Shi made a phone call first. After a while, when the three of them went out, there was already a car waiting outside. Before getting into the car, Ren Baqin whispered to the Empress, "Don't use your full strength, just show a little bit of strength." The Empress waved her hand. She didn't need Ren Baqin to say this. In fact, her other state was her true strength. Ren Baqin didn't know about this and not many people knew about it. Hua Sanlu knew about it, but he was already dead. The 8 pavilion masters were dead as well. The 2 disciples who barely survived couldn't tell anything about the Empress's condition. After a while, Everyone appeared outside the city at a remote place. After getting out of the car, Qinshi fiddled with his laptop for a while and pointed the screen at the two of them. On the other side of the screen was a middle-aged man wearing glasses. He looked very dignified, but he shouldn't be the main character. Rinpoche guessed that the main character was still at the back. "We want to take a look at the authenticity first, then we will discuss some issues," the middle-aged man said. The Empress and Rinpoche looked at each other. In a split second, the Empress appeared 50 to 60 meters away and lifted her leg. Boom! There was a rumbling sound. Even through the screen they could feel the ground trembling. The ground around the Empress, which was at least 200 to 300 square meters, was all cracked and the stones under the soil were protruding. Regardless of whether it was Qinshi, the other world, or the person on the other side of the screen, everyone was stunned. It was one thing to guess it, but another to see it with their own eyes. Regardless of whether it was appearing 50 to 60 meters away in a split second or the power of this kick, it was shocking. Especially the power of this kick. It didn't seem to cover a large area, but one had to remember that this was land. Normally, if this kick was very powerful, it would be like a pile driver directly nailing it into the ground. However, the Empress covered the entire area with her power and used it on a single surface. Furthermore, it wasn't a flat surface that was pressed down, but the ground was uprooted. Just the method of using this power was already beyond imagination. Chapter 272. On the other side of the screen, although Rinpoche could only see one person, there were actually many people watching this scene. It could be said that every one of them was a person of considerable status. After all, this matter was too important and might even affect the future of mankind. "Can I look at something else?" The bespectacled middle-aged man on the screen pushed his spectacles up and said slowly. Rinpoche sneered. In the next second, a gun appeared in his hand and he pointed it at Qinshi's head. "Sakama drenched in ketchup, do you want to see it?" The veins on Qinshi's forehead were throbbing. This guy really flipped out at the drop of a hat. The man on the screen was stunned at first, then his face turned angry. "We are willing to display our strength, but it doesn't mean that you can casually make requests. Are you waiting to see the performance? Do you want to perform a duet for you to see?" Rinpoche sneered. In a place where the screen couldn't be seen, a few people almost spat out their tea. This guy's mouth was a little too poisonous. However, such a reaction was very normal. After all, that woman might be a so-called immortal cultivator. It would be strange if she was easy to talk to. The difference in strength allowed her to completely look down on ordinary people. "Why don't we talk to someone else? The person behind you, at least show your face, right? Otherwise, I don't even know who I'm talking to, right?" Rinpoche asked again. After Rinpoche finished speaking, he waited for the response from the screen. In a faraway room, an old man put down his teacup and nodded to the person beside him. "Connect it." After a while the screen went dark. When it lit up again, the people and environment in the screen had changed. An old man sat on a chair and nodded slightly toward the screen. "Hello, big boss." Rinpoche put the gun behind him and immediately had a radiant look on his face. This was a real big boss. He had seen him on television more than once. "Mr. Rin, I don't know how you would like us to address you. Let's call you this first." The old man smiled. His voice was very slow and his tone was very amiable. "We have reached a consensus on the matter of cooperation. In that case, let's discuss on the basis of cooperation and seek common ground while reserving differences. We have some ideas and Mr. Ren, you should also have your requests. Both sides should state them. This is the basis of communication, right?" Rinpoche applauded. As expected of a big shot, the way he spoke was different. He immediately set the tone. "First of all, I want to ask a question. It doesn't affect our cooperation, but I want to understand something on the basis of our cooperation. Was there anyone else like Miss Chi? Is it just her or are there others?" Rinpoche thought about it and felt that the other party's question was very sharp. The problem affected a wide range of areas. If there was only the Empress, why wasn't there anyone else? Since she could do it, why couldn't others? If there really was a legendary immortal cultivator, how could there only be one person? If there were others, where were they? What was his relationship with the Empress? Would they appear? These answers could affect the other party's attitude and approach in many aspects of cooperation. At this point in time, there were still many people watching the screen from a place where Rinpoche couldn't see. They were carefully observing any of his subtle movements to determine some things. "It's not just one person," Rinpoche replied after careful consideration. As soon as he said that, many people's spirits were lifted. Some people who were watching him said, "It's almost true." They were all professionals, but they wouldn't say whether Rinpoche's words were true or false. Instead, they would say it was almost true or not to provide a reference. After all, observing a person's expression and some subtle movements couldn't really tell. This was especially true for those who had undergone specialized training. "What level is Miss Chi's strength at?" "It's considered high," Rinpoche replied. Logically speaking, she should be at the top. However, he hadn't forgotten something. It was that the former emperor led a group of people and left after attaining longevity heaven. Why did they leave? Where did they go? Great Xia had been founded for 70 years. Logically speaking, the first emperor was still far from reaching the end of his lifespan. Were there still such people? Were they still alive? Rinpoche didn't know any of these. There were still many secrets in that world that he hadn't come into contact with yet. "It's almost true. Where are the others? How many people are there?" The old man in the video asked another question. At this point he was a little nervous. If these people appeared in this world, no one knew what kind of changes would occur. However, one thing was certain, and that was chaos. When many powerful people appeared in this world, would they abide by the laws? Even a fool would know that it was impossible. They would only abide by some of their own rules and wouldn't care about the laws of the world. "A paradise," Rinpoche exclaimed. In fact, he suddenly felt that the so-called paradise in the Taoist classics might not be any different from the other world. However, there was a big difference. Even the Blessed Enclave had entrances and exits. The other world was related to the mystery of his travel. Although it was just a change of words, it already gave people a different feeling. After all, the paradise had always been associated with the so-called immortals. "It's almost true. It's almost false." Some people felt that Rinpoche's answer was more true, while others felt that it was false. However, more people felt that it was true. As for how many people there are, you don't have to think too much about it. They won't come here. This is because it's very difficult for them to come here and they need to fulfill an important condition. I don't need to say anything else. Rinpoche's words were all true, but he concealed some things. "It's almost true. In that case, can ordinary people go to the so-called paradise?" No. Following that, the other party asked a lot of questions about the paradise, the cooperation between the two parties, and a question that everyone was very concerned about, whether the so-called martial arts could really help one live forever. It's impossible to live forever, but it's possible to prolong one's life. When one's cultivation reaches a certain level, one can live for 200 to 300 years or even longer. Rinpoche's words made many people excited. Lifespan had always been the instinctive pursuit of intelligent life. With today's technological progress, there might be more ways to prolong one's life in 200 to 300 years. In that case, what requests do Mr. Ren and Madame Chi have? The old man finally asked. In fact, he still had some questions, but they weren't urgent and could be answered slowly in the future. He needed to digest and think about the content of this conversation. "This isn't urgent. First, withdraw the wanted order and then borrow 100 million euros. I'm out of money." Rinpoche was excited. After talking for so long, he could finally ask for money. The old man's gaze froze for a moment and then he laughed. "The country's money belongs to the country. It's the people's tax money, not an individual's. The bank can grant you some loans, but remember that you have to pay them back." The old man smiled. "Let's put this aside for the time being. When will Mr. Rin return to China? Come to XX with Madame Chi and have a meal. My Europe tour hasn't ended yet." Rinpoche had been a little wild recently and wasn't in a hurry to return. "In that case, let's wait for your early return. After all, there's still a lot to discuss about the cooperation." The old man nodded. "Why are you going back for the new year?" Rinpoche said. He didn't go back for the new year last year. This year, his parents were so worried that he had to go back for the new year. When the laptop screen turned black, Rinpoche turned to look at Chinshur and asked, "How do we get a loan? By the way, help us apply for passports. We need them urgently." Chapter 273. Papa Ren's hands trembled slightly when he saw the familiar name on the screen. "Hello, Dad, I'm going back at the end of the year." Rinpoche's voice came from the other end of the phone and surprised him. He was shocked by the content. "It's good to know that you are fine. Be well outside and don't call home," Papa Ren said in a trembling voice. Even after such a long time, he still felt as if he had been struck by lightning when he recalled the news he had just heard. "It's all right, don't overthink it. I'm not a wanted criminal anymore." Rinpoche laughed heartily. "What happened?" Papa Ren was shocked. Wasn't he wanted for murder? Ren Bachin replied in a deep voice, "Actually, I'm a spy. At that time, the police needed information on a criminal gang, and I happened to have dealings with them because of something. Of course it wasn't illegal. So the police found me and I thought it wasn't too dangerous, so I became an undercover police officer. Now that the gang has been destroyed, I'm clean." Ren Bachin's words stunned Papa Ren. Really? Papa Ren didn't want to think about some of the loopholes in his words. The so-called finding Ren Bachin because he had dealings with them sounded wrong. But he was still willing to believe that what his son said was true. "Of course it's real. Otherwise would I dare to go back?" Ren Bachin replied. That's great, that's great." Papa Ren's lips were trembling and he didn't know what to say. Ren Bachin felt a little guilty. "It's okay. I'll go back in 2 months. Where are you now?" Papa Ren couldn't help but ask. After so long he finally dared to ask this question. "I'm traveling in Europe. Wait, I'll show you the video." Ren Bachin then turned on the video and let Papa Ren look at the scenery outside the window. "Come back soon. Your mother and I are very worried about you," Papa Ren couldn't help but say as he looked at the exotic buildings outside. "Understood. Go back as soon as possible and tell Mom not to worry," Ren Bachin said. "There won't be any more danger, right?" Papa Ren asked again. He only hung up the phone after getting a definite answer. Ren Bachin kept his phone and turned around. The Empress was sitting on the sofa not far away from him, flipping through a fashion magazine. Although she couldn't understand it, she could look at the pictures. At this moment, the two of them were in a hotel suite arranged by Chen Shi. After a whole day, their passports and a brand new bank card were sent over. At this moment, there was really nothing else to do. They just had to wait for the two of them to return to China before they could start working together. The Empress suddenly raised her head and said, "You seem to be lying all the time recently." In the past 2 days she had suddenly discovered this problem, and it made her a little conflicted. "People used to call me an honest and cute little husband. However, after I gave my only sincere heart to someone, I can't take it out anymore," Ren Bachin said with a straight face. He sighed in his heart. "Back then people really called him an honest and cute little husband. That is my lost youth as well as running under the setting sun." Ren Bachin's words made the Empress's heart beat a little faster. Every time this fellow said these words, it was always like this. "In that case, let's go." Ren Bachin bowed slightly and extended his hand in an inviting gesture. 2 days later, on the basis of friendly cooperation between both parties, Chen Shi had a bitter look on his face as he arranged for someone to specially deal with the shopping bags in the suite of Ren Bachin and the Empress. After Ren Bachin and the Empress left the room, they disappeared without a trace. No one was able to track the two of them at all. Ren Bachin and the Empress saw their surroundings change, and they were already in Yangxin Palace Hall. Light shone in through the door. Beside the Empress's wooden couch were 2 floor lamps that were also emitting light. However, the hall was still a little dim. The Empress released Ren Bachin's hand and returned to the couch. She lazily lay on it and looked around. The change between the two worlds, the relaxed feeling in that world, and the desolate feeling after returning had also affected her. That relaxed feeling hadn't subsided, and she didn't want to stay here for a while. "Pour me some wine." "With pleasure." Ren Bachin chuckled and put down the 2 barrels in his hands. One barrel was ammonia water, and the other barrel was silver nitrate, which was specially used to make silver mirrors. As for the other things, they could be obtained in this world, but it was slightly more troublesome. However, this world had to nurture basic physics and chemistry. Otherwise, a lot of things couldn't be done and they couldn't bring everything from Earth. Since he went in and out of Yangxin Palace Hall every day, he knew where the wine was kept. He went straight to the wine pot and returned with a wine cup to pour the Empress a cup. Seeing the Empress drink the wine in one gulp, Ren Bachin filled it up again. "Drink with me," the Empress said. Ren Bachin poured himself a cup, gestured for her to drink it, and the wine flowed down her esophagus and into her stomach like a knife. He went to the side, opened his laptop, searched for a bit and played a canon. The slow sound of a piano played and a warm atmosphere grew in the hall. After drinking another cup of wine, Ren Bachin stretched out his hand and said, "Your Majesty, do you want to dance? I saw it at the restaurant yesterday." Ren Bachin was referring to the scene at the restaurant yesterday, where the two of them witnessed a couple proposing. Everyone at the scene gave their blessings and applause, and the restaurant played the canon at the right time. In their joy, the couple danced along with the music. Ren Bachin still hadn't forgotten that scene. The Empress's eyes curved and she was a little moved. This music could really touch people's hearts. She was also a little hesitant. She had never done such a thing before, and her identity made her disdain doing such things. Rinpoche took a step forward, held the Empress's fingers and said, "Why don't you try it and see what it feels like?" The two of them stood facing each other. The Empress and Rinpoche were about the same height, and they could look straight into each other's eyes. Rinpoche put one hand on the Empress's shoulder and the other on her waist. A warm and soft touch was transmitted to his palm, causing his heart to flutter. This was the first time he and the Empress were so intimate. The Empress felt a man's hands on her body. She was a little nervous and all the hair on her body stood up. A completely unfamiliar feeling that she had never felt before attacked her heart. Don't be nervous. The first step is like this, the second step is like this, and the third step. Rinpoche comforted the Empress softly. However, the Empress became even more nervous. Such an intimate action and the warmth from his hands made her feel as if an elephant was ramming in her heart, and her ears turned red. She felt that she had never been so clumsy before. The confidence of the fifth most powerful expert in the world had disappeared. At this moment, the Empress looked over Rinpoche's shoulder and saw Qin Yuan and Hong Yuan at the door with their mouths wide open. Feeling nervous, the Empress subconsciously exerted a little force. Bang! Rinpoche flew out and landed on the wall of Yangxin Palace Hall. An hour later, when Rinpoche woke up, he found himself lying on the bed in Pingle Park. His whole body was in pain and his head was hurting as well. It was as if he had suffered a serious injury. "Since you are awake, have a good rest. Don't move around for the next 2 days," the Empress said faintly as she sat on a stool not far away. Following which, she left in a hurry as if she was escaping. Rinpoche wanted to touch his head, but just as he was about to exert force, he felt a burst of pain on his back, causing him to break out in cold sweat. What exactly happened? Rinpoche was at a loss. How did he end up like this? After carefully recalling for a long time, he remembered that he had just returned from Milan with the Empress and drank 2 glasses of wine with her. After that, he couldn't remember how he ended up like this. Even if I drank too much, it shouldn't be as if I was stepped on by an elephant, right? What exactly happened? Chapter 274. Those who have read 264 before can watch this again. Previously, I thought of a plot and casually added it. It was indeed inappropriate. After revising it, I posted this. I repeat, it's 264,264,264. Papa Ren's hands trembled slightly when he saw the familiar name on the phone. "Hello, Dad, I'm going back at the end of the year." Rinpoche's voice came from the phone and surprised him. He was surprised by the content. "It's good to know that you're fine. Be well outside and don't call home," Papa Ren said with a trembling voice. Even after such a long time, he still felt like he was struck by lightning when he thought of the news he just heard. "I'm fine. Don't think too much. I'm not a wanted criminal anymore." Rinpoche laughed heartily. "What happened?" Papa Ren was shocked. "Wasn't he wanted for murder?" Rinpoche said in a deep voice, "Actually, I was undercover. At that time, the police needed information on a criminal gang. However, I happened to have dealings with them because of a certain matter. Of course it wasn't illegal. Therefore the police found me. I considered that it wasn't dangerous and became undercover. Now that the gang has been destroyed, I've cleared my name." Rinpoche's words stunned Papa Ren. "Really?" Papa Ren didn't want to think about the loopholes in his words. The so-called finding of Rinpoche because he had dealings with them felt wrong. However, he was still willing to believe what his son had said. "Of course it's true. Otherwise how would I dare to go back?" Rinpoche said. That's great, that's great." Papa Ren's lips trembled and he didn't know what to say. Rinpoche felt a little guilty. "It's fine. I'll go back in 2 months. Where are you now?" Papa Ren couldn't help but ask. After so long he finally dared to ask this question. "Traveling in Europe. Wait, I'll video you." Rinpoche then played the video and let Papa Ren look at the scenery outside. "Come back soon. Your mother and I are very worried about you," Papa Ren said as he looked at the exotic buildings outside. "Understood. Go back as soon as possible. Tell my mother not to worry," Rinpoche said. "There won't be any more danger, right?" Papa Ren asked again and hung up after getting a definite answer. Rinpoche kept his phone and turned around. The Empress was sitting on the sofa not far away from him, flipping through a fashion magazine. Although she couldn't understand it, she could look at the pictures. At this moment, the two of them were in a hotel suite arranged by Chen Shi. After a whole day, their passports and a brand new bank card were sent over. At this moment, there was really nothing else to do. They just had to wait for the two of them to return to China before they could start working together. The Empress suddenly raised her head and said, "You seem to be lying all the time recently." In the past 2 days she had suddenly discovered this problem, and it made her a little conflicted. People used to call me an honest and cute little husband. However, after I gave my only sincere heart to someone, I can't take it out anymore, Rinpoche said with a straight face. He sighed in his heart. Back then people really called him an honest and cute little husband. That is my lost youth as well as running under the setting sun. Rinpoche's words made the Empress's heart beat a little faster. Every time this fellow said these words, it was always like this. In that case, let's go. Rinpoche bowed slightly and extended his hand in an inviting gesture. Pa. Rinpoche was speechless. 2 days later, on the basis of friendly cooperation, Qin Shi resentfully arranged for someone to handle the shopping bags in the suite that Rinpoche and the Empress were staying in. After leaving the room, Rinpoche and the Empress disappeared without a trace. No one was able to track the two of them at all. Rinpoche and the Empress saw their surroundings change, and they were already in Yangxin Palace Hall. Light shone in through the door. Beside the Empress's wooden couch were 2 floor lamps that were also emitting light. However, the hall was still a little dim. The Empress released Rinpoche's hand and returned to the couch. She lay on it lazily and looked around. The change between the two worlds, the relaxation in that world, and the coldness after returning had also affected her. That relaxed feeling hadn't faded and she didn't want to stay here for a while. Pour some wine for me. With pleasure. Rinpoche chuckled and put down the 2 buckets in his hands. One of the 2 buckets was ammonia and the other was silver nitrate, which was specially used to make silver mirrors. As for the other things, they could be obtained in this world, but it was slightly more troublesome. However, this world had to develop basic physics and chemistry. Otherwise, a lot of things couldn't be done and they couldn't bring everything from Earth either. After going in and out of Yangxin Palace Hall every day, Rinpoche knew where the wine was kept. He went straight to the wine jug and returned with a wine cup to pour the Empress a cup. Seeing the Empress drink the wine in one gulp, Rinpoche filled it up again. "Drink with me," the Empress said. Rinpoche poured himself a cup, motioned for her to drink it, and the wine flowed down her esophagus and into her stomach like a knife. He went to the side, opened his laptop, searched for a bit and played a canon. The slow sound of a piano played and a warm atmosphere grew in the hall. After drinking another cup of wine, Rinpoche stretched out his hand and said, "Your Majesty, do you want to dance? I saw it at the restaurant yesterday." Rinpoche was referring to the scene at the restaurant yesterday, where the two of them witnessed a couple proposing. Everyone at the scene gave their blessings and applause, and the restaurant played the canon at the right time. In their joy, the couple danced along with the music. Rinpoche still hadn't forgotten that scene until now. The Empress's eyes curved. She was a little moved. This music could really touch people's hearts. She was also a little hesitant. She had never done such a thing before, and her status made her disdain doing such things. Rinpoche took a step forward, held the Empress's fingers and said, "Why don't you give it a try and see how it feels?" The two of them stood facing each other. The Empress and Rinpoche looked about the same height, and they could look straight into each other's eyes. Rinpoche put one hand on the Empress's shoulder and the other on her waist. A warm and soft touch was transmitted to his palm, causing his heart to flutter. This was the first time he and the Empress were so intimate. The Empress felt a pair of men's hands on her body. She was a little nervous and all the hair on her body stood on end. She had never felt this way before and it was a completely unfamiliar feeling. Don't be nervous. The first step is like this, the second step is like this, and the third step. Rinpoche comforted the Empress softly. However, the Empress became even more nervous. Such an intimate action and the warmth from his hands made her feel as if an elephant was ramming around in her heart. Her ears had also turned red. She felt that she had never been so clumsy before. The confidence of the fifth most powerful expert in the world had completely disappeared. At this moment, the Empress looked over Rinpoche's shoulder and saw Qin Yuan and Hong Yuan at the door with their mouths wide open. The Empress was nervous and subconsciously exerted a little force. Bang! Rinpoche immediately flew out and stuck to the wall of Yangxin Palace Hall. An hour later, Rinpoche woke up and found himself lying on the bed in Pingle Park. His whole body was in pain and his head was aching as well. It was as if he had suffered a serious injury. "Since you are awake, rest well. Don't move around for the next 2 days," the Empress said faintly from a stool not far away. Following which, she left in a hurry as if she was escaping. Rinpoche wanted to touch his head, but just as he was about to exert force, he felt a burst of pain on his back, causing him to break out in a cold sweat. What exactly happened? Rinpoche was at a loss. How did he become like this? After carefully recalling for a long time, he remembered that he had just returned from Milan with the Empress. Then he drank 2 glasses of wine with the Empress. After that, he couldn't remember how he became like this. Even if I drank too much, it shouldn't be as if I was stepped on by an elephant, right? What exactly happened? Chapter 275. After lying in bed for 2 days and using a lot of precious herbs, Rinpoche was finally able to get up and move around. Up until now, he still didn't know what exactly happened, but he knew the condition of his body. Many bones in his back and shoulder blades were cracked, and he almost had a concussion. It seemed like he was hit by a truck. But how could there be a truck in Yangxin Palace Hall? The only person who could do it was the Empress. However, when he asked this question, the Empress avoided it and even her ears turned red. This made him even more curious about what happened that day. If he said that he angered the Empress after drinking and was beaten up by her, why did her ears turn red? She would only behave like this when she was shy. But what exactly happened? If he couldn't figure it out, he didn't want to think about it. The Empress wouldn't tell him either. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan should know, but they didn't say anything either. Even if he racked his brains, he wouldn't have thought that he would dance with the Empress, let alone cause a murder. When he was able to move a little, he asked someone to carry him to the empty space next to the training ground beside the palace and told the people from the Ministry of Works about his plans for a school. In fact, it was just to erect a wall and build a few houses. In addition to the 3 houses for school, there was also a library for books and reading and a laboratory. However, the first thing to do was to build the 3 houses. The rest could be done slowly. After another 2 days, Rinpoche was finally able to move by himself. Although his body was still in pain, it wasn't a big deal. This world was indeed unique in terms of medicine, whether it was the black mud cream or the medicine this time. With his previous injuries, he would probably need at least a month to walk on Earth. 100 days to recover from a serious injury wasn't an exaggeration. When they returned to Earth, the 2 of them went directly to Spain and stayed there for 3 days. In fact, there was a place in Spain that Rinpoche wanted to see. It was Barcelona's Celestial Beach. In the past, he only heard about it on the internet and always wanted to see it. However, the weather wasn't right and the Empress was beside him. The Empress almost flipped the table when she saw the bikini. If she saw Celestial Beach, Rinpoche felt that he wouldn't have a good ending. You won't die if you don't court disaster. Rinpoche deeply agreed with this wise saying of the ancients. This time, Rinpoche brought along a set of glass laboratory utensils and glucose. Then he headed straight to the glass factory with his imperial bodyguards. As soon as he arrived at the glass factory, a burly man greeted him, Sir Ren. This burly man was called Jiao Zhua, and he had been working for the imperial family. Previously, when the glass factory was being built, Rinpoche and the Empress wanted him, and he was finally assigned to this position. This person had followed the caravan to the Yun Nation and Dayo a few times and was literate. Furthermore, he was one of the few ancient race members who were more cautious and meticulous. He would be a pretty good helper. Of course, this cautiousness and meticulousness was only relative. In the beginning it caused a lot of trouble. However, things had gotten better recently. How have you been recently? Is the color of the glass gone? Rinpoche asked after getting off the horned cow. Sir Rin, I was just about to report that the color of the glass is much lighter than before. I reckon that we will be able to produce colorless glass very soon, Jiao's was said with a joyful look on his face. Let's go take a look. Rinpoche nodded slightly. A moment later he saw a flat piece of glass placed in a room. Part of it was green in the past while the other part was green now. Comparing the 2 pieces, one could see that the color was much lighter. Well done. Rinpoche nodded. It's what I should do. Jiao Zhua grinned. Have you made the molds that I asked you to make? Rinpoche asked. Yes, and I have tried to make some of them. Jiao Zhua opened the box at the side and revealed some glass cups. They were all classical cups and goblets, and their color was also a little green. Sir, if we bring these things to the Yun Nation and Great Xia, they can be sold for a high price, Jiao Zhua said with a smile. Rinpoche picked up 2 of them and looked at them carefully. He shook his head slightly and said, they are still a little rough. The thickness of the walls and the bottom of the cups aren't very uniform. Remake the molds and get the best craftsmen. Got it, sir. Jiao Zhua had a look of regret in his eyes. He felt that the ones in the box were pretty good. However, they still weren't up to standard for Deputy Prefect Ren. Following which, Rinpoche moved the box that contained the glassware out and found a room to conduct the silver mirror reaction experiment. When Jiao saw the glassware that Rinpoche took out, he finally understood why Rinpoche didn't like the glass cups that they made. The color of the bottles and jars that Rinpoche took out was pure and transparent. There were almost no flaws, and the glass cups that they made could not be compared to them. For the next few days, Rinpoche would go to the glass factory every day. Every day he would use those glass bottles and jars to conduct experiments in that small room. He would mumble words like sodium hydroxide, silver nitrate, ammonia, and so on that no one could understand. From time to time he would kick the wall in frustration. Hearing the angry screams from inside, the imperial bodyguards outside were already used to it. In any case, no matter what Rinpoche was doing inside, they just didn't let anyone in to disturb him. After spending a few days and experiencing dozens of failures, Rinpoche finally completed the silver mirror reaction experiment. For most people, this experiment could be completed in 2 hours. When he looked at the palm-sized mirror in his hand, his face was filled with joy. His chemistry teacher could finally rest in peace in the netherworld. After the first time, the second time would be much easier. Rinpoche called a few craftsmen over and taught them how to make the silver mirror step by step. In the afternoon, cries of, "Ah!" and, "Why are you guys as stupid as pigs?" could be heard coming from the room again. "Sir, what's a pig?" someone asked. "Return to the city." Rinpoche stormed out of the room with blue veins popping out on his forehead. "Lu Pinghai should be here in the next few days, right?" A handsome young man dressed in embroidered clothes asked while riding on a horse. "Young master, this is the news," a middle-aged man with a long spear on his back replied. Looking at the young man beside him, there was a trace of regret in his eyes. The last descendant of the Yu family was actually a cripple in terms of cultivation. Unless he could get his hands on Lu Pinghai's spirit yuan pill. It was just that he didn't know if the item that he brought this time would make him relent. "I will definitely succeed. Even Lu Pinghai will be tempted by this item. I will get the spirit yuan pill and take back what belongs to me," the young man said with a smile. In his eyes, there wasn't a trace of doubt on whether he could succeed or not. "Everything that happened was God's way of training for me. I will definitely succeed. I will return the disdain and supercilious looks that those people gave me one by one. Uncle Ping, it has been hard on you all these years. If it wasn't for your kindness to the Yu family, I'm afraid I wouldn't be alive today," the young man sighed. "It's my duty," the man addressed as Uncle Ping replied. "You're an Earth Embryo Realm expert and yet you're guarding a cripple like me. You don't know how many people are secretly cursing you," the young man said with a smile. If it wasn't for Uncle Ping, he wouldn't even be able to keep the last things that belonged to the Yu family. Uncle Ping smiled and didn't reply. When the two of them reached the outskirts of the village, the young man stopped and looked at it. "It's really shabby." Then he turned to look at the forest at the side. That was where the grave of Lu Pinghai's best friend, was. At this moment, Uncle Ping's expression suddenly changed. "Young master, be careful." Before he finished his sentence, he had already appeared in front of the young man at lightning speed. The long spear on his back was already held horizontally in his hand, deflecting 2 incoming arrows. "Ah!" A surprised sound came from the forest. Then 2 burly men who looked exactly the same walked out from the forest. "You're the third batch. Aboriginals." Uncle Ping's expression changed. The other party should have the same purpose as him. As for the other party saying that he was the third batch, there was no need to ask about the whereabouts of the previous 2 batches. "Do you want to do it or should I?" The 2 Aboriginal men looked at each other. Rock, paper, scissors. Uncle Ping's face turned red. No matter what, he was still an Earth Embryo Realm expert. When had he ever been humiliated like this? Come. The limit is 10 moves. If you don't die, I'll let you go." One of the burly men walked out with an expression as if he had won a prize. He looked at the broadsword in the other party's hand. It looked like the standard broadsword of Dayo, but it was longer and thicker. "Young master, step back first," Uncle Ping said in a deep voice. He didn't doubt the other party's words. Once the Aboriginals made a promise, they wouldn't go back on it. As long as he could withstand 10 moves from the other party, he was still confident in his strength. The other party had underestimated him. He had a move that had never failed before. Those who had seen it before were all dead. Unfortunately, there were 2 opponents this time and he could only use that move once. 2 minutes later, the burly man spat at the corpse in front of him. Then he punched the sorrowful young man to death. He then dragged the two corpses into the forest. What's this? It looks like something good. A voice came from the forest. Keep it. I'll show it to the great general when I get back. Chapter 276. In the eastern sea, an old man in green robes stopped outside a small fishing village. The old man had nothing on him other than a flute at his waist and a jar of wine in his hand. Looking at the somewhat dilapidated village, the elder's gaze was filled with sorrow and nostalgia, as well as reminiscing about the years that had passed. In the blink of an eye, so many years had passed. I'm afraid that in a few years this village will no longer exist. The old man stood outside the village for a long time before turning around and walking towards a small forest nearby. However, he had only taken a few steps when he stopped. Come out, the old man said in a deep voice. As soon as the old man's voice fell, two men wearing coarse clothes walked out from the small forest in front of them. They had the same face, the same height, the same sturdy body, the same bald head, and the simple expression on their faces. Just by looking at their faces, they gave people the impression that they were simple men from the mountains. However, the long sabers on their shoulders gave them an austere aura. Eighth in the world, Lu Pinghai. We two brothers have been waiting for you for a long time. The two of them spoke at the same time, their voices somewhat muffled. Lu Pinghai looked at the two of them without moving his brows. Aboriginals rarely appeared in the other nations, but they had specifically come here. It was unknown whose orders they were under. His Majesty said that he wants to exchange a primary spirit elixir with you. You can name your conditions, the two continued. True enough. Lu Pinghai suddenly realized that it was Qi Zixiao. Tell Qi Zixiao that I don't want anything. You can go back. Lu Pinghai shook his head. Her Majesty said that if you don't agree, she will look for you personally, the two of them said. The Empress actually said that if Rinpochen didn't agree, she would beat him to death. But if he said that, Lu Pinghai would probably turn hostile on the spot. No matter what, he was still ranked 8th in the world. How could he allow others to threaten him like this? Then let Qi Zixiao come and find me. Lu Pinghai laughed and walked past the two of them, not even sparing them a glance. Although Qi Zixiao was ranked 5th in the world and there was also Hong Wu who was ranked 9th in the world, he was not afraid of them. As the 8th most powerful expert in the world, he definitely had his own confidence. If they hadn't fought, who knew what would happen? Qi Zixiao was originally ranked 7th, but didn't he also kill the 5th Hua Sanlu? How could he not have any trump cards? Lu Pinghai, do you really want to offend His Majesty for a primary spirit, Dan? Both of them turned around, their hands already on their blades. Although Qi Zixiao is powerful, she won't make me hand over my things just because of her words. Today, for Qi Zixiao's sake, I'll let you two leave. Don't act recklessly. Lu Pinghai coldly snorted and swung his sleeves behind him. Immediately, his sleeves extended several meters like snakes and coiled around the hilts of the two sabers. Clang. The two of them unsheathed their long sabers and slashed at their sleeves. However, a sudden force came from the sleeves and pushed the sabers away. The two long sabers slashed at their own necks. Roar. The two of them lowered their heads at the same time, their blades crisscrossing as they slashed at each other's sleeves. However, they missed. The sleeve loosened its grip on the saber hilt as if it was a living thing, then heavily struck the two men's chests. The two men could not help but fall back. They only stopped after retreating 7 or 8 steps. Blood flowed from the corner of their mouths. Lu Pinghai was surprised. Even an expert who had just attained the spirit wheel level wouldn't be able to withstand such an attack, let alone a direct hit on their chests. Yet the two of them were still standing there. The Aboriginals really had a lot of experts, and they were already this strong with just 2 people sent out. It's not easy to cultivate. I'll let you two off today. Lu Pinghai left these words and disappeared into the forest. The two men looked at each other, turned around and left. Since the two of them were no match for him, they had to go back and tell the general about Lu Pinghai's rejection. Lu Pinghai entered the forest, went straight to his residence and finally sat down in an open space. His old friend had lived here for decades, but now he couldn't even find his grave. However, this was also good since no one would disturb him. He knew where Rinpochen lived even with his eyes closed. I'm back to see you again? Lu Pinghai opened the wine gourd, drank a mouthful and sprinkled a little on the ground. He looked at the silver mirror in his hand and then at the craftsman and Jiao in front of him. How many days did it take for you to make this silver mirror? How stupid are you? Even a dark-faced man is smarter than you. A dark-faced man was a nickname for a wild boar. 2 days. Rinpoche squinted at the craftsman who answered him. Even a black-faced man would be able to make these things in 2 days. The craftsmen lowered their heads and listened to him quietly. A row of tall and burly men stood there with their heads lowered like a wall. Rinpoche nagged for a long time before finally saying, "Each of you will be rewarded with 10 taels of silver and your monthly allowance will be increased by 1 level." Even though these people were hopelessly stupid, they still managed to do it. They should be scolded and rewarded. "Thank you, sir." Everyone immediately put on a smile. 10 taels of silver was equivalent to more than 2 months of their monthly allowance. Furthermore, their monthly allowance would be increased by 1 level, which was a lot of money. "All of you may leave." Rinpoche let the craftsmen leave first and then instructed Jiao Zhuo on the main tasks. At this moment, the most important ones were concave and flat mirrors, which were used to make solar furnaces. After these were completed and the Mount Damo iron ore mine was settled, they could then sell it to other countries through caravans to make money. For the next period of time, Rinpoche woke up in the morning and went to the glass factory. At noon he returned to the palace and practiced martial arts in the afternoon. After the problems with the glass and silver plating were solved, the next step was much smoother. Even though the production speed of the glass factory wasn't fast, it was much faster than when they first started. The ratio of the materials had also been found, and the number of problems had decreased. After a week, the concave and silver mirrors had already filled 2 rooms. Next, Rinpoche led the craftsmen to the glass factory every day to use wood and rattan to make square shelves. The shelves were also concave. Then the mirrors were fixed on the shelves. A few days later, in the afternoon, a convoy of more than 100 people majestically left Lan City and headed straight for the glass factory outside the city. However, they didn't enter the newly built brick building. Instead, they went to an open space beside the glass factory. At this moment, there was a wooden platform there. On top of the platform, there was a huge shelf that was 6 meters tall and 12 meters wide. On top of the shelf were concave mirrors. From a distance, it was dazzling and blinding. Many people covered their eyes with their hands to block the white light. The Empress came down from the carriage. Behind her were Shi Qing, Zhizhihai, Tu Wan, Tong Jinye, Qin Xuan, and the other high-ranking officials from the 6 ministries. As long as they were free, they were pulled over by the Empress. Everyone was guessing what the Empress wanted to see by calling so many people over. At this moment, when they saw the distorted scenery reflected in the concave mirrors on the tall shelf, Shi Qing, Zhikohai, Tong Jinye, and the others immediately knew what it was. It was just that they didn't know if it was like what Deputy Prefect Rin said. If it was, it would be a joyous occasion. The others looked at the large mirror in front of them with curiosity. "Is that a mirror? I don't know what it is made of. It doesn't look like a bronze mirror, but it's actually so bright. But the reflection doesn't seem to be moving. Look at the stone in the mirror, it's deformed. Hey, look at the person reflected in the mirror. His body is so short. I'm dying of laughter." The Empress looked at the large mirror in front of her. After sizing it up for a moment, she said to Rinpoche, "You can start now." Rinpoche looked very relaxed. After such a long time he had finally made this. Now was the time to showcase it. He hoped that this bunch of idiots wouldn't mess it up. Following his greeting, 30 guards who were usually in charge of his arrangements ran to one side and carried out 30 mirrors that were 2 meters long and 1 meter tall. Then they placed them on the ground in front of the shelf. Following which, someone carried out a 4 meters long iron pillar that was as thick as the mouth of a bowl and placed it on the ground. Rinpoche walked to the front of the 30 mirrors and adjusted the angle of one of them to reflect the sunlight onto the concave mirror on the shelf. Then, after the concave mirror focused the sunlight onto the top of the iron pillar. After he adjusted the angle, the others followed his movements and began to adjust the mirror. From time to time, Rinpoche helped everyone adjust the mirror. At the beginning, many people had their eyes on him. However, as the Empress, Shi Qing, and the others stared at the top of the iron pillar, more and more people looked over. They were doubtful about what they could see. But immediately they got a huge shock. The top of the iron pillar suddenly burst into flames for no reason. One had to know that this was an iron pillar. Everyone wasn't blind. From the footsteps of the person carrying the iron pillar and the way it stood up, it was definitely an iron pillar. But how could an iron pillar catch fire? Something even more surprising happened. Not only was the top of the iron pillar on fire, but it was also melting. Dark red molten iron flowed down the body of the pillar. Very quickly, the top of the iron pillar was missing a chunk. Not only were those who saw it for the first time shocked, even Shi Qing and the others were surprised. Previously, it was only a round plate that burned a hole in a steel saber. Now it melted an iron rod that was as thick as the mouth of a bowl. The difficulty was more than 10 times or even 100 times greater. Therefore, when they personally saw the effect, they were all shocked. I congratulate your Majesty and Dayo. Deputy Prefect Ren has made a great contribution by making this item. Within 100 years, Dayo will no longer have to worry about a shortage of iron, Shiqing said loudly with a face full of joy. Following his words, everyone reacted and congratulated Her Majesty one after another. Although they didn't know what happened, they understood one thing. That iron pillar that was as thick as the mouth of a bowl had been melted. In that case, Mount Damo's iron mine would soon have a steady stream of fine iron ore. They would no longer have to worry about the lack of military equipment. This was indeed a joyous occasion, And Rinpoche, who had contributed the most to this matter, had a higher status in the hearts of many people. Previously, when Her Majesty said that she wanted him to set up an academy, everyone didn't take it too seriously. Many people didn't even consider it. In the future, if Her Majesty asked about it, they would say that even though the disciples in their family were not talented enough, they just needed to focus on practicing martial arts. However, from the looks of it now, this person really had some capabilities. Chapter 277. On the second floor of a restaurant on Jingyang Avenue near Beihang District, more than 10 young men and women were sitting around 2 tables. Have you heard that Her Majesty wants to open an educational institute? A tall and burly youth who was about 16 or 17 years old said while drinking at the table. Rinpoche is in charge, another youth casually said. Umph. The one who spoke was a beautiful young girl who was about 17 or 18 years old. She slammed her bowl on the table. The others looked at her and laughed mischievously, but they didn't restrain themselves. This young girl was called Lu Yueyao. She suffered a big loss during the Great Hunt and was verbally abused by Rinpoche. In the end, everyone had no choice but to stand up and target her. After that, she received 10 lashes and was grounded for a month as punishment. Originally, she wanted to find an opportunity to take revenge after she was released. However, after staying at home for a few days, she heard a piece of news that made her dumbstruck. That pretty boy who only knew how to talk was actually chosen as the Empress's future husband. She couldn't figure out what Her Majesty saw in that kid. Her Majesty wasn't only the Empress, but she was also the 7th most powerful expert in the world. Her beauty was enough to enchant countless people. However, such a person actually chose that kid as her husband. This almost made her smash everything in the room. As time went by, her hatred for Rinpoche didn't diminish at all. Instead, it intensified. Every time she heard news about Rinpoche, she would feel unhappy. However, the others didn't care much about her feelings. Instead, they chatted about the educational institute. What does an educational institute teach? This wasn't something that only one person wanted to know. Educational institutes were still new in Dayo. It should be the same as Great Xia. They teach calligraphy, mathematics, military strategy, and law. Someone said with certainty. Maybe there's even Confucian classics. Someone laughed. That's hard to say, someone replied. Confucian classics was the general name for several doctrines that were passed down a long time ago. They mainly taught people to be kind, how to discipline themselves, and how to think about heaven and earth, society and people and nature. It was the main doctrine in Great Xia, the Yin Nation and the Qin Nation. However, the aboriginals didn't like it, let alone the descendants of the officials. In Dayo, the fist was the hard truth. Although there were laws in most people's hearts, fists were the most important. Everyone put this matter aside after discussing for a while. Besides practicing martial arts, these young people would at most read a few books at home. They would also call their friends to have fun outside and occasionally talk about the happenings in Lan City. For example, the matter of the Black Star Academy. Everyone just casually talked about it and no one took it too seriously. It was also impossible for them to enter any school. Everyone knew that only those who were not particularly talented would go. Rinpoche was sitting in Yangxin Palace Hall with a list of names given to him by the Empress. On it were the names of the students who were sent by the court officials to enter the academy. Shurgan, don't tell me he's the grandson of the great elder? Rinpoche casually asked when he saw the first name. It's his youngest son, the Empress said faintly. Oh, great elder is indeed young at heart despite his age, Rinpoche exclaimed. The great elder should be at least 70 or 80 years old, right? It was written that Shurgan was 12 years old, which meant that the great elder was still having a son when he was 60 or 70 years old. Ren Baqin continued to read and immediately saw a familiar name. Tong Lan, 10 years old. This little girl's innate talent isn't good? Ren Baqin was shocked. She was only 10 years old, yet she kept telling him why flowers were so red and that her innate talent wasn't good? Tong Lan's innate talent is pretty good, at least it's better than her grandfather, the Empress said. Didn't they say that all the students are good-for-nothings with poor innate talent? Ren Baqin pointed at the name list and questioned. Tong Jinya said that since she's still young, she can stay in the academy for 2 years and consider it as finding a playmate. The Empress plucked a grape and threw it into her mouth. Ren Baqin was speechless. Do you think this is a kindergarten? However, after thinking about it, he had suffered so many losses in the hands of that girl and suffered so many beatings. This was a good opportunity for him to take revenge. It's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. As for the thought of letting her off because she was a delicious Lolita, Ren Baqin extinguished it before it could even form in his mind. If you don't take revenge, you're not a gentleman. A great man can't be ruthless. These were the words of the ancestor and he couldn't forget them. Hee hee. Ren Baqin grinned and laughed. The Empress took another look at him and rolled her eyes. She could roughly guess what Ren Baqin was thinking at this moment. However, that girl Tong Lan was very crafty. At that time it was uncertain who would be torturing who. Ren Baqin looked at the names on the list. There were a total of 31 people, which was about what he expected. He could only teach these disciples by himself. However, after thinking about it, Ren Baqin said, "Can you recruit a few from the commoners? They can stay in the academy as teachers in the future." After all, these were the children of the big shots in the imperial court. In the future they would most likely become officials in various places. He couldn't possibly be the only one teaching them, right? All right. The Empress nodded her head. But, have you thought of a name? Lanxiang Academy. Ren Baqin looked serious. Seeing that the Empress's eyes were starting to twitch, Ren Baqin immediately changed his tune and said, "I'm joking. Actually, it's called New East." Seeing that the Empress's eyes were starting to emit a murderous aura, Ren Baqin changed his tune again and said, "Actually, this is also a joke. Let's call it Black Bamboo Academy. A few days ago, I saw a few purple bamboos in a small bamboo forest nearby." The Empress was more or less satisfied when she heard this name. She continued to eat her grapes and ignored Ren Baqin. It's going to be New Year in a month, right? Are there any activities for New Year? After that, the academy will start the enrollment, Ren Baqin asked. He still didn't know how to celebrate New Year in Dayo. Yes, lantern grabbing. The Empress explained. In the past, it was limited to young people below the age of 20, and the winners will be rewarded. If the others perform well, they will also be favored by the girls in the villages. If you want to participate, I can give you special permission to participate. If you perform well, I might even reward you. The Empress said with a smile on her face. What rules? Ren Baqin was immediately excited. First, build a frame and hang the lantern on it. The participants will be divided into groups of 10 and can choose their own people. The person who grabs the lantern first wins. The Empress's eyes were full of smiles. Don't tell me I can fight against the others? Ren Baqin immediately laughed dryly. Of course, this is the time to show off your skills, the Empress said as a matter of course. Forget it then. Ren Baqin immediately rejected her. He couldn't even beat a 10-year-old Lolita, so he would be courting death if he participated. Don't you want to hear about my reward? The Empress's tone carried a rare gentleness that made Ren Baqin's heart flutter. However, he immediately shook his head like a rattled drum and said, I'm a man and I won't participate if I say I won't. Since the Empress had spoken like this, it definitely wasn't anything good. There was a huge pit ahead and only a fool would jump into it. I can give you a kiss. The Empress's voice was so soft that Ren Baqin could hear her clearly. Upon hearing this, Ren Baqin suddenly raised his head and looked at the Empress. Her face was flushed, and her shy look made Ren Baqin feel as if there was a pile driver in his chest. Ren Baqin put on a righteous face and said, I feel that death is inevitable. It can be as heavy as Mount Tai or as light as a goose feather. I will die without regrets for your majesty. Then he changed the topic and said helplessly, It's not that I'm unwilling to participate in the lantern-grabbing contest, but I've been afraid of heights since I was young and can't climb high. Therefore, even though I feel pain, I have no choice but to give up. Chapter 278. On a plane flying from Tokyo to Shanghai, Ren Baqin looked at the Empress who had thrown a tantrum for a few days and sighed. I think I'd better participate in the lantern-grabbing event. Even though I have a serious fear of heights, a real man has his limits. The Empress tilted her head, looked at him from the corner of her eyes, and then turned to look at the scenery outside. The Empress had been throwing a tantrum for a few days. She didn't say a word and only rolled her eyes when she saw him. She wasn't like the cold and aloof Empress at all. This was the first time such a situation had happened to the Empress. At first he felt that the Empress was quite amusing, but after a long time, it wasn't so fun anymore. In fact, Rinpoche had some guesses in his heart. Could it be that the Empress had come to visit her? This was because the Empress would occasionally reveal such a feminine side, which was very different from her usual self. Other women had good tempers most of the time, but there would always be a few days a month when they were not normal and had a terrible temper. On the other hand, the Empress was cold and aloof most of the time. Every month she would be abnormal and very feminine. The more Rinpoche thought about it, the more he felt that this possibility was not small. As the saying went, there must be something wrong with something abnormal. Rinpoche reached out and grabbed the Empress's hand. It was very soft and warm. He was relieved that he didn't feel the expected "pa," and the pain didn't come. These few days he had also asked people about the lantern-grabbing event and more or less understood it. Just like what the Empress said, the lantern-grabbing event was divided into groups of 10. 9 of them were there to protect the commander. The participating groups could also attack other groups. Even though they couldn't be heavy-handed, there would be serious injuries every year. Fortunately, the Aboriginals had thick skin and flesh, so there wouldn't be any deaths. Also, both parties couldn't use weapons, but they could wear armor. Generally, it was leather armor. It wasn't very useful, but it had some protective effect. This gave Rinpoche some ideas. Since they could wear armor, was there a limit to leather or iron armor? He could make a full-body armor with steel spikes and make himself look like a hedgehog. Who would dare to touch him then? When the time came, he just had to bump into the crowd. It was decided. When the plane landed, Rinpoche held the Empress's hand and walked out of the cabin. They froze like dogs. The two of them had just come back from Hawaii. They had changed planes in Japan and had specially bought 2 thick coats. However, it was still very cold when they came out. So cold. Rinpoche tightened his clothes with one hand and pulled the Empress's hand with the other. They followed the crowd and walked forward. But he was finally back. It had been almost half a year. When he escaped, it was the end of June and the beginning of July. Now it was the last day of December. Tomorrow would be the new year. Mr. Rinpoche was stopped the moment he stepped out of the airport. The other party was a man in his 30s, and there was a man and a woman beside him. There's actually a plane to pick me up. This treatment is a little beyond the norm. Rinpoche laughed. It looks familiar. I think I've seen it before. Yes, I was even shot by Mr. Rin before, the other party said with a face full of hidden bitterness. It was just a joke. Don't be offended. Actually, I have a lot of respect for people like you who work for the country. Rinpoche immediately knew who it was. He laughed and directly brushed the matter aside. All 3 looked askance at him. Respect? Sorry, they really couldn't tell. Both of you, please. The 3 of them didn't say anything else. There were 2 cars waiting outside. Rinpoche and the Empress got into the car at the back while the middle-aged man sat in the front passenger seat. Rinpoche held the Empress's hand along the way. In any case, as long as there wasn't a "pa," he wasn't prepared to let go and was prepared to hold her hand until next year. 2 hours later, the car entered the underground parking lot of a building and the few of them alighted. After entering the elevator, the Empress lowered her head and looked at the hand that Rinpoche was still holding. "Pa." Rinpoche looked at his hand that was swollen like a pig's trotter and said seriously, "It's a little thicker and rounder than last time. I might have put on weight recently." The 3 of them looked askance at him and inexplicably felt that they had been showered with dog food. When they got out of the elevator, there were already people waiting outside. 5 or 6 men and women in suits were waiting at the entrance. The one in front said rather enthusiastically, "Mr. Rin, Madam Chi, you are finally back." Those who didn't know would think that the 2 of them had gone overseas to study. The other party was a newly established department with a huge research team behind them. They were prepared to study the things that Rinpoche had brought out. For the next half of the day, they discussed in detail about some cooperation matters. The previous time was just a preliminary agreement between both parties. This time it was official. First of all, Rinpoche couldn't be as reckless as before. At least he still had to abide by the country's laws. He couldn't be reckless just because of his special status. With regards to this, Rinpoche didn't have any objections. If no one provoked him, he wouldn't create trouble for no reason anyway. However, Rinpoche asked for the identities of the two secret departments, which was the department that Qinshi was in. In the future it would be easier to deal with matters outside. At the very least, they could scare off a lot of trouble if they encountered any problems. Originally, the other party wanted to give Rinpoche and Qi Zixiao a nominal position in the army, but was rejected by Rinpoche. If that was the case, the two of them would be tied together. After that, they added some details about the cooperation. For example, if the research results of the things that Rinpoche brought back were to be studied, how would they be distributed? Generally speaking, the country would take the majority. However, Rinpoche had the right to know. There was no reason for him to be kept in the dark about the research results of the things that Rinpoche brought back. Furthermore, some of the research results could be converted into commercial applications. Both parties added some details in this area. For this matter, Rinpoche couldn't possibly ask a lawyer for help. It was entirely up to him. He didn't know if he would be at a disadvantage or benefiting from some aspects. After half a day, both parties understood some of the ideas of the other party and reached a partial agreement. In the end, Rinpoche felt that his brain was hurting. It was too troublesome to talk to these people because it was all about minor details. However, this was something that had to be done. If these things weren't explained clearly, who knew what certain people would do in the future? Especially after 10, 20, or 30 years, no one could say for sure what the current leaders would think. For most people, there wasn't a need to consider so much. However, for Rinpoche, 30 years on Earth was equivalent to 15 years. Finally, both parties reached a memorandum of understanding. As for a contract, it was impossible to have one. The Empress sat there in a daze the entire time. She wasn't the least bit interested in such matters. After that, Rinpoche took out some things that he brought along. A bottle of soil, a bottle that contained an outstanding little white flower that he picked from the garden, and a piece of stone. These things looked ordinary, but they were the foundation of a world. From these things, it might be possible to see the differences between Earth and that world. The other party immediately arranged for people to keep these things. Mr. Rin, we need something more special. The person who spoke was Yang Sen, the head of the newly established department called Messier 87. Messier 87 was a galaxy located in the constellation Virgo. This name also implied another world. From this, it could be seen that some people regarded the so-called paradise as a completely different world. After all, in the theory of Taoism, the paradise was located in the space of the big world. As a result, they had various kinds of connections with our world. At the same time, due to the relative isolation of their existence, the paradise had its own unique space-time structure. Therefore, the paradise could be said to be another world. However, Rinpoche felt that the person who came up with this name had probably seen too much Ultraman. Research always has to start from the basics. I also want to know what these basics are different from each other. I will bring some more things over a period of time, and some of them will be what you want, Rinpoche said. It's a pleasure working with you. The other party nodded. They also wanted to know what Rinpoche wanted to know. Since Rinpoche said that he would bring more things over a period of time, it was fine. You can contact me if there's anything. Yang Sen handed a business card without a name to Rinpoche. I will try my best to help you settle some things within my capabilities. However, breaking the law doesn't count. That night, Rinpoche held the Empress's hand at the bund and looked at the 4D lights in the sky. The gorgeous colors shone on everyone. There were young people everywhere, and most of the cold wind was blocked by the people around them. As time passed, the surrounding atmosphere became more and more enthusiastic. 60 seconds, 59, 58. As the countdown began, this year had come to an end. Rinpoche held the Empress's hands at the right time and stood opposite her. 10, 9, 8. As the last 10 seconds passed, many couples around them shouted while holding hands or hugging each other. In the last few seconds, many people wanted to leave a kiss that crossed the new year. Rinpoche stared into the Empress's eyes and saw that her gaze was like the surface of a lake. Her face was slightly bashful. Rinpoche moved his mouth closer to hers when the last 3, 2, 1 resounded. This was such a good opportunity. What if the Empress was infected by this atmosphere? Rinpoche thought to himself. The Empress's body shrank back a little. Then she subconsciously raised her hand and lightly hammered Rinpoche's chest. This action was very common on television, and the Empress had seen it many times. Chapter 279. How does it feel to have a girlfriend who is highly skilled in martial arts? Rinpoche did not know if anyone had considered this question, but he felt that he was qualified to answer. It was probably similar to dating a road roller. If you were not careful, you would be buried in the ground. This was risking your life to date. After a week, he finally got out of bed. He felt that he was going to have a psychological scar. However, he had to thank the super strong ointment from the other world. Now, he still remembered Yang Sen's surprised expression when he visited the hospital. He really could not imagine how he became like this. His sternum and 2 ribs were fractured, and it was similar to being hit by a car. However, at that time Ren Baqian was in the crowd at the Bund. Thus, the only person who could cause harm to him was Qi Zixiao, who went in and out with him. After hearing the news, many people guessed whether Ren Baqian and Qi Zixiao had a conflict and whether it would affect their cooperation. However, Qi Zixiao did not leave Ren Baqian's bedside for the next few days with an apologetic look on her face. Until someone raised the question of whether it was domestic violence. However, no one asked Ren Baqian for confirmation. They only felt pity when they thought of him. Naturally, Ren Baqian was embarrassed to say that he was bashfully punched in the chest by the Empress. However, there was one thing that he understood. If he did not want to risk his life to get married and the Empress would become a widow, he had to improve his strength. However, the Empress's attitude was not right these few days. Although it was not very obvious, he could feel it. He also knew what the reason was. When he arrived at Yangxin Palace Hall, he saw the Empress in a daze. He did not know what she was thinking about, and there was a wine flask beside her. After seeing Ren Baqian, the Empress regained her original cold expression. However, there was some guilt in her eyes. It was very similar to the look she had when Ren Baqian received a concussion. Although she could control her strength most of the time, Ren Baqian was really too weak. Especially when she could not maintain her calm, there were more and more emotions in her heart. If he wasn't paying attention, he might be seriously injured. Zixiao. Ren Baqian stepped forward and held the Empress's hand. The Empress retracted her hand slightly and Ren Baqian grabbed it. People will get used to some things bit by bit, Ren Baqian said softly and held the Empress's hand in both of his palms. He secretly added in his heart, "This does not include being seriously injured. Don't worry too much. Many things will happen naturally. I'm afraid that one day, I'll have to personally bury you in the garden," the Empress said faintly. Her voice was a little cold and the contents of her words were chilling. Ren Baqian knew that she was just feeling a little guilty, so there was a little resistance in her heart. She was afraid of hurting something. In other words, he was timid. The female Empress's heart was in a mess these few days. She did not know what she was feeling right now. In all these years, this was the first time she had felt this way. She was a little upset. It was the same feeling as before. This was the first time his heart was beating fast, the first time his heart felt like it was being pounded by an elephant, the first time he felt guilty, the first time he felt timid. "I trust that you will control your power." Looking at this hand, it was beautiful, soft and warm. It made one want to hold it forever. Even though it's very powerful, it's not meant to harm anything. Ren Baqian held the Empress's hand and spoke in a very warm voice. The Empress allowed Ren Baqian to hold her hand, and her heart was beating very fast. Ren Baqian gently kissed the Empress's finger. As if she had been electrocuted, her whole body trembled slightly. The coldness that had just been restored immediately melted like ice and snow. Ren Baqian felt that the success rate of kissing her now was very high. However, there was a saying that went, "You won't die if you don't court death." Before reaching the man-wheel level, Ren Baqian felt that his small body would not be able to take a hit. It was better not to do anything too dangerous. "Don't think too much." Ren Baqian straightened his body and smiled. "We should set off now. A lot of people should be waiting anxiously." The Empress looked at him, wrinkled her nose slightly and let out a soft humph. It sounded like a little girl raising her head proudly and making a sound. Ren Baqian knew that the Empress had recovered when he heard this sound. A few hours later, Ren Baqian and the Empress appeared in that building again. "Mr. Ren, you recovered very quickly." Yang Sun was a little surprised. It had only been half a month, but it seemed like there were no major problems. "Do you want to do a more detailed examination?" "No need." Ren Baqian waved his hand. "Don't try to trick me into letting you guys study me." Yang Sun felt a little regretful. At present, both parties were in the early stages of cooperation and were more cautious. "How's the previous one?" Ren Baqian asked. Soon after, he saw a stack of printed reports. "Most of the composition is still the same, but there are many microorganisms that I have never seen before. Some of them died after leaving the soil and some of them have undergone some changes. We need more time to find out more," Yang Sun explained briefly. "However, the common iron and calcium content in the soil is very low, and the content of titanium and potassium is higher. It could be seen that Yang Sen was very concerned about the research progress in this area, and he almost blurted it out. Ren Baqin roughly glanced at the report and put it back on the table. Let's go to the laboratory to take a look. You guys will be interested in the things that I brought this time. Ren Baqin was very confident because he had brought the elongation saber this time. After all, they had just started working together and he had to bring something of great value. Although there were many valuable things in that world, for example, anything from the Kirin's body such as the cloud crystal, which was also very precious in that world. However, after thinking about it, he still brought the elongation saber over. The elongation saber's characteristics were great enough. Whether it was growth or mental control, it was enough to shock everyone. This thing wasn't very useful in his hands, but in the hands of the nation, it could be used to research a lot of valuable things. At the same time, he also wanted to know if this saber still hid any secrets. However, he didn't have the conditions or the time to experiment. He might as well bring it over. Perhaps there would be some additional gains during the research process. When Yang Sen heard what Ren Baqin said, a trace of joy appeared on his face. The things that Ren Baqin brought over previously were indeed slightly different from those on Earth, but their current value wasn't considered high. One had to know that Earth was a paradise. How could some things like soil be able to satisfy people? Accompanied by Yang Sen and 2 guards, the 2 of them entered the elevator and went all the way down to the basement. There were a few floors above this building and they were the exposed parts. The important places were in the 3 floors below ground level. After exiting the elevator and passing through 2 doors, they were greeted by a vast expanse of green. It was as if they had suddenly arrived in a forest, and above them was a blue sky. Ren Baqin could tell that something wasn't right at first glance. He stretched out his hand to touch it and realized that it was actually a wall. The forest was fake and presumably the sky above them was also fake. The Empress also touched it and didn't care anymore. She thought that the surroundings were made of glass. This is a new technology that hasn't been applied in the commercial market yet, Yang Sen said simply. Subsequently, they came to a laboratory that was filled with tempered glass partitions, various instruments and computers. It was similar to what Ren Baqin had imagined. After taking a look around, Ren Baqin had a better understanding of the laboratory. At present, there were thousands of talents in this laboratory, and they could carry out multiple projects at the same time. There were also thousands of supporting staff including guards, kitchen staff and assistants. At present, it was one of the more advanced laboratories in the country. Most of the previous projects had already been completed, and they were ready to fully focus on the things that Ren Baqin had brought over from the paradise. However, at present they could only study some soil, a small flower, and a piece of rock. Most of them were idle. Very soon, Ren Baqin met the person in charge of the laboratory. He was a white-haired old man who immediately asked Yang Sen, "What did you bring this time?" "This is Elder Lu. He has done considerable research in biology and is one of the people in charge of this laboratory," Yang Sen introduced. "These 2 are Mr. Ren and Madam Qi. Mr. Ren has brought some things. The 2 of you are here for a checkup." Elder Lu's eyes lit up when he heard Yang Sen's words. "This time I'm here to study something else." Ren Baqin shook his head slightly, and a sheathed knife appeared in his hand. "What's this?" Elder Lu stared at the knife and asked. Yang Sen immediately thought of some legendary magic treasures and the like. Ren Baqin drew the knife from the sheath, and before the 2 of them could see, he made a cut on his hand and let the blood drip onto the knife. After making a few cuts, it wouldn't hurt anymore. With a thought from Ren Baqin, the knife in his hand suddenly grew from 1 foot to 2 feet. This shocked the 2 of them and almost made them think that it was a switchblade. Following which, it became a 3-foot blade that completely grew out of the handle. This time Yang Sen's eyes immediately lit up. Ren Baqin took out some ointment and applied it on his arm. In the blink of an eye, the wound began to close and tender flesh began to grow. "This knife is called Changxing. You have seen its function. It can grow after sucking blood," Ren Baqin told the 2 of them. Elder Lu stared at Ren Baqin's arm and asked, "What medicine is this?" "Black mud cream. I have a laboratory that is researching this, and it will be on the market soon," Ren Baqin said faintly. Even so, Elder Lu was still very interested. Following which, he set his sights on the long knife in Ren Baqin's hand and asked, "It can grow only by sucking blood? Can it become shorter?" With a move from Ren Baqin, the Changxing knife returned to its original size of 2 feet. It can be controlled with your mind. Furthermore, as time passes, the length will slowly return to its original size. This thing can be controlled with your mind? Elder Lu was suddenly shocked. Upon hearing this, Yang Sen's eyes lit up like a searchlight, and his breathing became heavier. Yes. Rin Baqin briefly explained the situation of this Changxing knife. Let me try, Elder Lu said. First of all, this knife could grow. The metal that could grow already proved its value. Although Rin Baqin said that it could absorb blood, the quality of the blood that flowed from Rin Baqin and the part that grew from the knife was too different. It completely didn't conform to the law of conservation of mass. Needless to say, it could be controlled with one's mind. If the theory was researched, it would have a huge impact on the modern world. To put it simply, it could drive with a single thought and stop with a single thought. Or to put it in another way, it could be controlled with one's mind. The thoughts in one's mind could be input into the computer. Or to put it in another way, the so-called virtual world technology. There were also other aspects. Chapter 280. Elder Lu took the elongation saber and held his breath for a long time before asking in surprise, "Why isn't there any reaction? How can this be?" Rin Baqin took the elongation saber back to his hand. It could grow or shrink according to his will, advance or retreat. Let me try. Yang Sen took it and held his breath for a long time while repeating, "Grow, grow." However, there was still no reaction after a long time. This time, everyone's gaze was somewhat strange. Rin Baqin pondered whether it could only be used by people from another world. However, he was an earthling. He stuffed the elongation saber back into the Empress's hand to see if there were any changes. After a few seconds, the Empress raised her hand and threw the saber back to him. "Only you can use it. This thing has the ability to recognize its owner?" Rin Baqin was flabbergasted as he didn't expect this at all. Not only was Rin Baqin surprised, but everyone else was also surprised. What did it mean for it to recognize its owner? Was this saber compatible with Rin Baqin in some way? Or did this saber have its own thoughts? The former was like a key opening a lock, so how did Rin Baqin control this saber? As for the latter, was this saber alive? It seems like I'm the only one who can use this saber. I'll bring back the things you need in a few days. Rin Baqin sheathed the saber. Although this saber was a little useless, he still felt that it was pretty good that only he could use it. Leave this saber here first. We still need to conduct some tests. Elder Lu quickly grabbed Rin Baqin's arm. Although only Rin Baqin could use it, this saber had great research value. Rin Baqin thought for a while and decided to let them study this saber to see if there were any secrets. "Don't break it or else you won't get anything else," Rin Baqin exhorted. Elder Lu held the saber and ran out to call for the researchers. He couldn't be bothered with Rin Baqin, who was left behind. His main goal now was to study the secrets of this saber. After leaving the saber here for the time being, Rin Baqin left with the Empress and returned to the haunted house in SY where several people died. At least, most people in that building thought that house was a haunted house. When Rin Baqin appeared in that neighborhood, a few people were stunned at first, then their expressions changed drastically. They quickly called the police after Rin Baqin left. "Hello, 110? I saw the wanted murderer." A few policemen were stopped just as they were about to set off. After all, Rin Baqin's arrest warrant had already been revoked. However, these police officers had a deep impression of his case, especially that note. As soon as he heard the news, he was immediately furious and wanted to arrest him. Only after the reminder did he remember that the man was no longer a wanted criminal. Until now, many people did not understand. The case that person committed was almost irrefutable, and the impact was so big, so bad, how could the arrest warrant be cancelled? Take a look. The person who stopped them earlier threw over a piece of paper. On it was a notice of what had happened. In the notice, Rin Baqin became a member of a certain secret department, and the Jin family was involved in a series of cases. In fact, there was no need to issue this notice, but they were afraid that someone would cause trouble for Rin Baqin again. Based on what Rin Baqin had done in the past, he might not be able to stir up any trouble in the end. He might as well notify them. As long as he doesn't break the law in the future, don't bother with him, the policeman reiterated. Rin Baqin stood in front of the door and looked at the newly changed lock and the key in his hand. He was slightly speechless as he couldn't even return to his own home. After calling Qin Shi and asking where the key to the new lock was, Rin Baqin opened the door. There was dust everywhere and the living room was filled with shopping bags. All of them were bought in Milan previously. There was a layer of cloth covering them and it looked like his bed sheets. He called the housekeeper and the housekeeper was surprised to receive the call. Rinpoche explained that he wasn't a wanted criminal, that it was a misunderstanding, and that he was actually a government employee. The housekeeper immediately promised to arrange for someone to clean up the house and bring a new contract. The Empress stood there and frowned slightly. As she flicked her sleeves, the dust in the living room seemed to be blown away by a storm. In an instant, nobody could see her. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, the Empress instantly appeared outside the door, leaving Rinpoche to be baptized by the dust storm. Cough cough. Rinpoche covered his nose with one hand and looked as if he had just crawled out from a pile of coal. He turned his head and looked at the Empress. The Empress looked back at him with an innocent look on her face. After waiting for an hour, the person who promised to come immediately finally arrived. At this moment, the house was even dirtier than before. The walls and ceiling were covered in dust. As long as one raised their voice, the dust would fall from the top of their heads. After more than half an hour, Rinpoche, who had taken a bath and changed his clothes, dragged the Empress to the supermarket to buy ingredients, sweets, and wine. "What's the matter?" Rinpoche looked at a young lady who suddenly blocked his way and asked. She was 27 or 28 years old, wearing a police coat, and had her hair tied into a ponytail. She looked very neat. The lady took out an identification card from her pocket and said, "Police. I'm just warning you not to offend me. Don't think that what you have done is over. If you think that I have done something wrong, you can arrest me." Rinpoche stretched out both of his hands and smiled. He took a glance at the identification card, and it seemed that the person was called Lin Mu. "However, my arrest warrant has already been cancelled, right? The others didn't come and only you came. If it isn't because you have a strong sense of justice, then what relationship do you have with the Jin family? I can tell you that one of them was my aunt. What did she do? She had never hurt anyone, but she died in the hands of a murderer like you." Lin Mu gnashed his teeth and said, "The most important thing for a family is to be neat and tidy. This was left behind by you, right? You are a murderer. You should be executed. Although I don't know what kind of background you have to cancel your arrest warrant, it doesn't mean that the previous incident is over. The Jin family has done so many things, why didn't you arrest them? What wrong did the people who were killed by the Jin family do?" Rinpoche revealed a sarcastic smile. "You seem to have a strong sense of justice, but in fact, you bully the weak and fear the strong. You might even be able to become a police officer because of your relationship with the Jin family. Therefore, why would you bother about them? In that case, do you want to take revenge now?" Speaking up to this point, Rinpoche slightly bent his body so that he could look straight into Lin Mu's eyes. He then said softly, "Take a guess, if you die, will anyone avenge you?" Lin Mu was so angry that his whole body trembled. "Do you really think that you can do whatever you want? You are threatening the police. Be careful or I will arrest you now." Rinpoche nodded seriously. "Yes, I can really do whatever I want." "You?" As soon as Rinpoche's voice fell, he laughed. It was meaningless to provoke this self-righteous and crazy woman. He also didn't think that he could really do whatever he wanted. He was just provoking her a little. "It seems like you are the one who is threatening me, right? I forgot to mention that I am a civil servant, but you are not qualified to know my specific identity. What I do is a national secret. As for the previous question, you should ask the Jin family when they are still around. Can you really do whatever you want with money and power? I believe they will give you an answer." Rinpoche smiled, turned around and pulled the Empress. They walked past the woman, leaving her gritting her teeth and standing in the same place. "You are very boring." The Empress was slightly dissatisfied. She actually wasted so much time on someone unrelated to her. "I just wanted to teach her a lesson. Moreover, I hate such self-righteous people." Chapter 281. Rinpoche didn't take the policewoman seriously, but after seeing her, Rinpoche recalled the aftermath of the Jin family. After returning to the car, he gave Qinshi a call as he should be more familiar with the situation. After asking, he found out that the Jin family was in a mess after he escaped. Several of the main leaders were dead, and there were almost no immediate family members left. The remaining people fought fiercely for the property, especially the relatives of the Jin family. At that time, some people thought of avenging Jin Wen and the rest, but before they had the chance, the police exterminated the remaining members of the Jin family and dug up all the previous incidents. After all, the Jin family wasn't clean, and this incident was so serious that the old scores were immediately dug up. Of course, there were also some departments behind the scenes. After the call, Rinpoche felt relieved and completely let go of this matter. The Jin family had already fallen apart and could no longer cause any trouble. For the next period of time, Rinpoche had absolutely nothing to do. Occasionally he would go to the school that was still under construction. The 3 brick houses had basically been completed. Sometimes, Rinpoche would think of something and ask the person in charge to add a little something in a certain place. For example, a swing. For example, digging a ditch to bring in water from a nearby stream. For example, building a pavilion. The rest of the time he would practice or receive Tonglan's one-on-one tutoring. Every time he lay on the ground after being educated by Tonglan, he would always remember a man saying, "I'm invincible in my background music." However, Rinpoche was exactly the opposite of him. "I've never won in my background music." Ah, what a painful realization. Traveling back and forth between the other world and Earth, his progress was still slow, but his strength had recently increased to more than 450 kilograms. At this time, Rinpoche couldn't see the surrounding scenery clearly at the bottom of the lake, but he estimated that he shouldn't be far from the bottom. When he touched the bottom of the lake, he would have completed the cultivation of the visualization of water, and reached the initial stage of the man-wheel level. This was a qualitative change. When he reached the initial stage of the man-wheel level, his entire body would undergo some changes, indicating that he had taken an important step. In Great Xia, only 1 in 1,000 practitioners could reach the man-wheel level, and only 1 in 100 could reach the earth-wheel level. From this ratio, some problems could be explained. The man-wheel level was an extremely important threshold. Early in the morning, Rinpoche cleaned himself up and shaved his hair, revealing his green scalp. He also shaved his beard. He even took a cold shower. Then he picked up Gun, who was hugging his thigh, and threw it to the side, causing it to collide with Tian. Tian and Gun were sent to Pingle Park recently. Otherwise Rinpoche would have missed them. He simply informed the Empress and got someone to send them over. When he arrived at Yangshin Palace Hall, the Empress was reading a thread-bound book. "Your Majesty, do you want to return with me? Have a taste of our new year and home-cooked meals." Rinpoche stood beside her, leaned his upper body against the wooden couch, and moved closer to see what the Empress was looking at. "Are you going home?" The Empress straightened her body and asked. She then casually slapped the book on his body. "Yes." Rinpoche nodded. It was time to go back. It had been so long. If not for the fact that the Empress was always by his side, he would have returned long ago. "I'm not going." The Empress immediately rejected him. Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief after hearing what the Empress said. After all, even though the Empress treated him well, she was still very cold to others. In addition, she had been in charge of life and death for a long time. Furthermore, she had the aura of a top-notch expert. Ordinary people would probably feel uneasy around her. Just by releasing a little bit of her aura, a vacuum zone would appear around her, and no one would appear around her. If he really brought the Empress back, he was afraid that there would be an awkward silence, and then an awkward silence. Therefore, Rinpoche felt that this wasn't a good time. However, it was still up to the Empress to decide whether to go or not. It seemed like the Empress didn't want to see anyone else now. The solar furnace should have arrived at Mount Damo by now, right? Rinpoche calculated that it had already been half a month. Even though it was a mirror type and had to be transported carefully, it should have arrived in half a month. According to the journey, it should have arrived yesterday, the Empress said. She had received the news previously. If they used the Yabber to send the letter, they should have received it by today. After all, not only Rinpoche and the Empress were concerned about this matter, but many people in the imperial court were also paying attention to it. This was a major event that could affect the entire Dayo. The people from the Ministry of Works, Ministry of Revenue, and Ministry of War were also waiting for the news. On Mount Damo, dozens of people were busy fixing concave mirrors on a huge shelf. A group of people surrounded them and watched the show from afar. "This thing can melt Mount Damo?" Gu Qiong, the supervisor of the iron mine at Mount Damo, and many of his subordinates looked at them busily. When he recalled what these people said last night, he was still in disbelief. "You will know in a while." The person who spoke was Tao Jiyuan from the Department of Ordnance. He followed them this time around. Regarding this solar furnace, he had naturally heard of it. Those who saw it with their own eyes that day often talked about it. He had also heard Feng Ho talk about it. He heard that it used the energy of the sun to melt steel. However, he wasn't very clear about the specifics. Following the busy craftsmen, the mirrors were fixed on the shelf one by one, just like a jigsaw puzzle. After spending the entire morning, the mirrors on the shelf were finally installed. Dozens of people took out some flat mirrors and began to adjust the angles. Finally, all the mirrors reflected the sunlight onto the solar furnace, and then onto an area with a radius of half a meter on Mount Damo. Everyone focused their attention there, wanting to see what would happen. In less than a minute or two they could see the mountain start to turn red, smoke and then catch fire. 3 minutes later the molten iron started to melt and flowed down the mountain wall. It's done. The person who cheered was the leader of the craftsmen. His name was Peng Zhe. Following which the other craftsmen also cheered. After working for such a long time, there were finally no problems. On the other hand, the others were dumbfounded as they looked at the molten iron flowing down Mount Damo. They actually did it. Previously, the method of burning the mountain could increase the output of the iron mine by several times. With this thing it wasn't just a few times but more than 10 times or even 100 times. Following which, the craftsmen prepared to install the second solar furnace. This time around they brought enough concave mirrors to make 3 of these solar furnaces. At the same time, someone taught Gu Qiong how to adjust the angle of the mirrors and the angle of the shelf. This was taught by Rinpoche. After all, they couldn't just melt a single point. At the same time, there was also a metal box that was specially used to collect the molten iron. All they had to do was place it at the bottom. When the molten iron fell into the metal box, it would heat up the metal box but it wouldn't melt. After all, the molten iron would cool down as it fell. Some of the molten iron would cool down and form wall hangings on the mountain wall. As for these newly formed wall hangings, as long as a hammer was used to smash them, they would fall. After 2 hours, the molten iron that flowed down and the iron pieces that fell and solidified on the mountain wall weighed about 500 kilograms. A solar furnace could be used for about 6 hours a day. At other times, due to the angle of the sun, the sunlight couldn't be reflected onto Mount Damo through the mirrors and the solar furnace. However, in just 3 hours, 1,500 kilograms of iron could be produced. 3 solar furnaces would be equivalent to 9,000 kilograms of iron. Excluding the rainy days, there would be at least 200 sunny days in a year. That was to say, Tao Jiuan sat on the ground without a care for his image. He didn't have enough fingers to count and couldn't calculate for a long time. 8 million kilograms? When Tao Jiuan finally came up with this number, his lips were trembling. This number really scared him. When the others heard it, they also started to tremble. Gu Qiong's face was flushed as if he had drunk too much. One had to know that Dayo's annual production of iron was only about 5,000 kilograms. Now, with this solar furnace, the annual production of iron was equivalent to 100 years of iron production from Mount Damo and Mount Liutsue. This number was simply too terrifying. Furthermore, as long as there were enough manpower and solar energy, this number would continue to increase. Based on the production of a saber that weighed 20 kilograms, close to 100,000 sabers could be produced in a year. One had to know that for so many years, Dayo didn't have a 100,000 strong army. One of the main reasons was the lack of weapons. Among the commoners, a short saber could be regarded as a family heirloom. When this news reached the Ministry of Works, the Ministry of War, and the Ministry of Revenue, these few departments were about to explode. The loud noise could even be heard on the streets outside. Tong Junior and Qin Chuan's wild laughter lasted for the time it took to burn a joss stick. Even though they had seen Rinpoche demonstrate the solar furnace, they didn't expect it to be so effective. That night, Tong Junior from the Ministry of Works and Qin Chuan from the Ministry of War invited their subordinates to a banquet at House Yunyan. In the end, it turned into a decisive battle at the summit of a brothel. Tong Junior had the last laugh again. When the Empress received this news, she was a little dazed at first. Soon after, she revealed a look of joy. At this rate, they could produce 200,000 weapons in 2 years. They didn't even need that many weapons. As long as they could produce 50,000 weapons, Dayo would have an additional 50,000 strong soldiers. 30,000 of them would be transferred to the Protectorate of the North and the remaining 20,000 to the Protectorate of the Southeast and Protectorate of the Northeast. At that time, even if Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Qin nation launched an attack together, she wouldn't need to worry. The Empress was excited. She stood up and walked a few steps in the hall. However, she remembered that the person who could share this joy with her wasn't here at this moment. At this moment, Rinpoche didn't know about this. Even if he knew, he probably wouldn't be as happy as the others. An annual production of 1.8 million kilograms was only 1,800 tons, which was about the same as the annual steel production of the Tang dynasty. One had to know that the annual steel production of China on Earth was 1 billion tons. 1,800 tons wasn't even enough to meet the steel consumption of a small city. However, this was already a huge improvement for Dayo. At the very least, in terms of weapons, they would have sufficient stocks and wouldn't be controlled by others anymore. Chapter 282. Rinpoche parked his car in the neighborhood and stared blankly for a long time. It was impossible for one to be afraid of homesickness. However, after escaping and coming back, there were still some feelings. At this time, there were many children setting off firecrackers. There were also people pasting couplets and hanging lanterns. Although the atmosphere of the new year had been fading over the years, the atmosphere in this neighborhood was still quite strong, perhaps because there were many old people. Not long after, Rinpoche's cell phone rang. Just as he answered the call, he heard his father shouting, "Why are you still in a daze? Is your girlfriend here?" Rinpoche's parents were extremely concerned about the woman who was by his side even when he was on the run. No. Rinpoche had only said one word when he was interrupted by his father. "In that case, quickly come up and help me paste the couplets." Rinpoche looked up and saw a figure flash past the window. It seemed that his father had been waiting there all along. Rinpoche got out of the car, took out his things and carried them upstairs. Before he could knock, his father opened the door and stood up to let him in. Mama Rin hurriedly came over and sized him up. "You have become much darker. Did you suffer much?" Speaking of suffering, Rinpoche was full of bitter tears. He felt that he had suffered a lot. For example, he was beaten up by the little loli with one hand, beaten up by the little loli with both hands, and beaten up by the little loli. In any case, he was beaten up once every 2 days. In addition, he would occasionally get punched in the chest by the Empress's small fists, which seriously injured him. It was indeed bitter. At present, Rinpoche was almost certain that his first serious injury was also caused by the Empress. It was just that he couldn't figure out why. As for the darkness, it would be strange if the sun in Dayo wasn't scorching hot. Putting down the things, he spread his hands and said, "Look at my face. Do I look like I suffered? It's mainly because I've been sightseeing in Europe, so it's a good opportunity to go out and see the scenery outside." "You have gained a lot of weight. How many kilograms are you now?" Papa Rin asked casually after sizing him up. 160? Recently, Rinpoche's physique had been going up in a straight line. He looked fine wearing thick clothes now, but after taking them off, his entire body was full of muscles. "In the past, I ate every day at home and didn't gain weight. Now that I've gone out for a walk, I've gained weight." Mama Rin complained about how Rinpoche didn't gain weight at home but gained weight after going out for a walk. "There's a lot of junk food in Europe and America, and there are all kinds of high-calorie foods. Fortunately, I've been training every day recently, otherwise I wouldn't be like this." "You still have the cheek to talk about training? You still have the mood to train? Do you know how worried we were?" As Mama Rin spoke, she poked Rinpoche's forehead with her one young finger. "I'm helping the country with some things." Rinpoche added, "I'm a civil servant now." Rinpoche and Rinpoche were surprised. "I can be considered a staff member of a certain department. There's no danger and I'm in charge of some simple tasks," Rinpoche said. "What about your business?" "It doesn't matter. This civil servant is actually a part-time job. It's just an identity." "There is such a thing?" Papa Rin and Mama Rin felt that it was somewhat inconceivable. In many places, people would fight to become civil servants. How could Rinpoche still have a part-time job? "I brought something back for you this time." Rinpoche opened his bag and took out a wooden box. "This is a product that our company is going to launch soon. It's called Black Jade Reconnection Ointment. If you suffer from external injuries, just apply a little of it and you'll be healed immediately." "Bah!" Mama Rin spat. "I've also read Jin Yong's new works. Kit, your words are getting more and more out of hand." Rinpoche thought about it and decided not to tell his mother that Jin Yong and Jin Yongshin were two different people. Speaking of which, Jin Yongshin was also quite amazing. As long as he wrote a book, it would be written by Jin Yong. The name of the medicine hasn't been decided yet, but the effect is real. As for external injuries, just apply this on them and they won't even leave a scar. Keep it well. Rinpoche placed the small box on the table. "The rest are clothes for you and your parents. Try them on when you have time." "Aren't we going to put up couplets?" "Work first. Where did Wanyin go?" Rinpoche asked curiously. Why wasn't Wanyin home on New Year's Eve? "He seems to have gotten a girlfriend. She's his high school classmate." "I reckon that they are already together," Mama Rin said somewhat discontentedly. In her opinion, it was still too early for a freshman to fall in love. "Not bad. Otherwise all the good cabbages would have been eaten by pigs. Rinpoche nodded. Then he suffered another blow from the six-pulse divine sword. If you didn't mention it, I almost forgot to ask. What's the name of your girlfriend? Where did he come from? You didn't invite her? Mama Ren's face immediately lit up. I'm from another city and I'm celebrating the new year. Rinpoche waved his hand. What's her name? What's her job? Why was she around when you were in Europe? Mama Ren still wouldn't let him off. Her surname is Qi and her name is Zixiao. She's a civil servant and is considered my superior. Don't I have a part-time job? That's it. Rinpoche managed to deal with all his mother's questions with great difficulty and went to the corridor with his father to put up couplets and the word fu. It was past 2 in the afternoon when Rinpoche returned. Rinpoche was sitting on the sofa and chatting with his father. He was talking about his experiences in Europe and, of course, omitted many inappropriate things for children. For example, he made a lot of sakama that was drenched in ketchup. According to him, this trip was basically a sightseeing tour. Of course, the truth was almost the same. During dinner, Papa Ren and Mama Ren asked a bunch of questions about his girlfriend, such as her birth date, family situation, and so on. This made Rinpoche's head hurt. 8 characters of birth? How could there be 8 characters of birth in that world? His grandfather was the founding emperor and was obsessed with cultivation. No one knew whether he was dead or alive. His father was the late emperor who was obsessed with cultivation and went missing after getting seriously injured. Could he say this? Would you believe it if I said it? The family celebrated the new year together. The next day, Rinpoche started to walk the streets and visit his relatives and friends. After his accident, his relatives were really nice. Nothing melodramatic happened. Instead, they helped Papa Ren and Mama Ren gather a lot of information. It was reasonable for Rinpoche to visit them and mention his identity as a civil servant at the same time. This made his family feel that he was similar to 007. After all, he carried the lives of more than 10 people and returned half a year later as if nothing had happened. This made it hard for people to doubt his words. For ordinary people, Rinpoche was considered a legend. Rinpoche didn't comment on this. If he revealed his girlfriend, he could engrave the word legend on his forehead. He didn't need to reveal it because Mama Ren helped him reveal it. Now that Rinpoche was successful in his business and had become a civil servant with 5 insurances and 1 housing fund, there were many people who wanted to introduce him to a marriage partner. Mama Ren then showed the photo that he had posted on his WeChat moments to everyone, but there was no response. Brother? Ren Wanyin sneaked up to Rinpoche. Sister-in-law, do you have a younger sister? No, get lost. Rinpoche slapped the back of his head. Chapter 283. Rinpoche stayed at home for a few days, enjoyed his family's affection, and received all kinds of gazes. Then he returned to Dayo. After changing his clothes, Rinpoche carried a bag to Yangshin Palace Hall. The bag contained the dumplings, braised pork and eggplant boxes that Rinpoche's mother gave him. The Empress was curled up on the sofa watching Qing Yunji with a tomato-flavored potato chip in her hand. Seeing that Rinpoche had returned, the Empress glanced at him indifferently, ignored him, and focused on watching the television series. Your Majesty, I brought you some dumplings. They were made at home and I insisted on bringing them to you. Rinpoche lifted the bag in his hand. He took a look behind the Empress, pointed at the main character on the screen and said, I always felt that men look ugly like this and they are almost the same as women. The Empress glanced at Rinpoche, looked at the gigolo on the screen and ignored him. Although the one in the television series was indeed similar to a woman. However, Rinpoche wasn't much better. He was just a little stronger now. When Rinpoche first arrived, he was also thin and weak. His waist wasn't even as thick as a human's arm. As for his appearance, there was no need to talk about it. Mount Damo has installed solar furnaces. With 3 solar furnaces, they can produce 3,000 kilograms of iron a day. The Empress thought for a while and told Rinpoche this good news. Even though a day had passed, she still felt happy. And Rinpoche was the one who could share this joy with her. They did a good job. Rinpoche's face revealed a happy expression. Although it was much worse than the modern world, it was already a good start with Dayo's foundation. With the remaining iron he could also make other things. For example, steam engines? Rinpoche and the Empress curled up on the sofa, each sitting at one end. Their actions were surprisingly identical and they were hugging their legs. The Empress realized that he was copying her, so she quietly picked up a potato chip and threw it at his face. After being seriously injured previously, The two of them consciously kept some distance between each other. Rinpoche was really too weak to be hurt. A light blow could seriously injure him. He was no different from tofu residue. However, this kind of small action was much more natural. Both of them felt that it was pretty good. From the next day onwards, Rinpoche resumed his normal life, practicing martial arts, getting beaten up, and at the same time preparing to teach the students. After all, the day was approaching. In another 3 weeks, Dayo's new year would be over, and it would be time for the students to report for duty. While preparing the teaching materials, Rinpoche realized that being a teacher wasn't an easy task. The students in Dayo were different from when he was young. At that time he had no other choice. Everyone else also learned the same things and went through layers of examinations to enter university. Furthermore, these things were still new to Dayo. They needed to be interesting and attractive to Dayo in order to do so. For the time being, Rinpoche's courses were Chinese, mathematics, physics, and chemistry. Among them, language was still easy. The main thing was literacy. Simplified Chinese characters. He was ready to spread simplified Chinese characters to this world. Mathematics was a necessity. Adding and subtracting with less than 2 digits required one to break one's fingers. Anything with more than 2 digits required one to guess. This was a common situation among the Aboriginal commoners. The officials were not much better off. They could do simple addition and subtraction, but if it was slightly more complicated, they would have to scratch their heads. Only the people from the Ministry of Revenue had mastered the multiplication and division of 2-digit numbers. There was almost no foundation in physical chemistry in this world. For example, when you hit a rock, your fist would hurt. Everyone knew this. If one were to ask why, it was simply nonsense. After all, a rock was harder than a fist. These were all reasons that should be taken for granted. He had not even considered the deeper effects of power, let alone others. If they wanted to build Dayo into a well-off imperialist society with Dayo's characteristics, it would not be possible without these foundations. No matter how strong one was, he could only destroy and not use it to build. Except for brick moving. Dayo had tens of millions of god-level brick-moving workers who could carry hundreds of kilograms of bricks as if they were flying. At this moment, Rinpoche was surrounded by darkness. He could only see a little bit of light when he raised his head. He was completely surrounded by water. The huge pressure almost kneaded Rinpoche together. Every inch of his body was under tremendous pressure. The last bit of air in his lungs was squeezed out. Rinpoche knew that he was going back soon. However, he still tried his best to dive down even if it was just a little bit. At this moment, his fingertips seemed to have touched something, causing his body to tremble. The lake was dead silent. There wasn't even a single water plant. It had been a few months since he touched something in the water. Could it be that I have touched the bottom of the lake? Rinpoche was ecstatic. Did touching the bottom of the lake mean that he had finally reached the threshold of the man-will level? However, his strength had also dissipated. His vision started to turn black. Soon after, he returned to the real world and felt extremely tired. After waking up, Rinpoche felt his body and didn't seem to have changed much. At this moment, his strength was about 250 kilograms, which was achieved bit by bit during this period of time. Other than that, his strength and speed didn't change much from yesterday. Have I reached the man-will level? Rinpoche wasn't too sure. He went out of the house and asked someone to prepare a medicinal bath. After soaking in the medicinal bath, he was still pondering. The man-will level was a barrier, and there should be some changes after he passed it. It seemed that he hadn't reached the man-will level yet. In that case, he would have to wait until he practiced at night. After soaking in the medicinal bath, Rinpoche left the palace with the guards and went straight to the glass factory. At this time, the end of the year was approaching, and there were a lot more people in Lan City. Many men and women wearing animal skins bought some salt, cloth, and other things in Lan City and brought them back to the village. They also brought a lot of furs and other things when they went down the mountain. Many of them simply tied up the wild beasts and carried them over. Rinpoche saw a sharp-toothed tiger tied up and hung on a tree trunk. 2 people carried it, one in front and one behind, into the city. In addition, there were many other things such as strange horns, birds in cages, and other things that Rinpoche had never seen before. They could only be found deep in the mountains. Rinpoche brought the ox rider and ran all the way to the glass factory. Under Jiao's lead, they entered a house. Inside, there were neatly stacked wooden boxes that emitted a fragrant smell of wood. He went forward and opened one of the boxes. Inside, there were crystal-clear glass cups. Every 2 cups were filled with hay to prevent them from being damaged during transportation. Rinpoche was used to seeing glass products and didn't think much of it. However, when Jianghu looked at these cups, his face was filled with pride. These were made by him and those craftsmen. After that, Rinpoche went to the side and opened another box. Inside there were many vertical silver mirrors. They were basically round and inlaid in a wooden disc. Rinpoche examined them carefully and nodded his head in satisfaction. These were the goods that would be sent to the other 3 countries after a period of time. At present, if the gold, silver and gemstones in the palace's treasury were exchanged for medicine, they could support him for 3 months at most. Although there would be a batch of gold and silver being sent to the palace at the end of the year. However, these gold and silver were the expenses of the palace next year, including the salaries of the palace guards, palace maids, the imperial concubines and the daily expenses of the Empress. Therefore, what Rinpoche needed for his future training would depend on this batch of goods. At this time it was close to the new year. The 2 caravans that belonged to the imperial family had already returned. When they left after the new year, they would bring these goods to the other countries and let them spit out some of the profits that they had previously earned in Dayo. The craftsmen will be rewarded with 10 taels of silver each, the apprentices and handymen will be rewarded with 3 taels each, and you will be rewarded with 20 taels of silver. You will be rewarded with 20 taels of silver. I will get someone to send the money over later. Everyone will have a fat new year, Rinpoche said faintly as he closed the box and left. Sir is wise. It is our fortune to be able to work under you, Jianghu quickly said. Chapter 284. That night, Rinpoche entered the visualization of water, again. It was still a lifeless lake with a faint mist and a few small trees. Rinpoche couldn't wait and dived into the lake. He swam to the center of the lake and dived down. 10 meters, 20 meters, 30 meters. The water pressure was getting stronger and the surrounding optical fibers were getting dimmer and dimmer. However, Rinpoche's condition today was better than yesterday. His heart was burning with passion. When his fingers touched the object below again, there was still a little bit of air left in Rinpoche's lungs. According to his experience, he could hold on for another 10 seconds or so. These days he was very familiar with the condition of his body when he dived down. Due to the lack of oxygen in his lungs, Rinpoche started to feel a burning pain. He focused all his attention on his hands and touched his surroundings. It wasn't mud as he expected, but a stone-like bottom. At the same time, one of his hands touched something protruding out. When he wanted to carefully identify what it was, he suddenly woke up and felt tired all over. What a pity, just a little bit more, Rinpoche thought. But just a little bit more. I can definitely do it tomorrow. Rinpoche waved his fist, but he didn't have any energy and went straight to sleep. The next day, Rinpoche dived to the bottom of the lake again to look for the object he touched last night. This time he finally touched it. It was something that looked like a stone ring. When he woke up from the visualization of water, he was somewhat unwilling. He was just a little bit away. That stone ring should be pulled off, right? Could it be pulled off? Was there something below? Rinpoche thought to himself. There was no record of this in the Rui visualization. I can definitely do it tomorrow. Rinpoche lay on the bed and waved his arms. On the 3rd day, Rinpoche withdrew from the visualization of water, again with a trace of unwillingness on his face. I can definitely do it tomorrow. On the 4th day, Rinpoche withdrew from the visualization of water, and lay on the bed. Damn it! On the 5th day, Rinpoche cursed, F***ck. There wasn't much progress over the past 5 days. Even Rinpoche had some doubts about whether his method was wrong. However, in the end, Rinpoche carefully thought about the Rui visualization that he was practicing. This visualization of water, from the start, was to absorb the effects of medicine and change his body little by little. Besides increasing his strength, his stamina was much better than before. For example, even if he walked for a few hours, he would not feel tired at all. His daily visualization of water, dive to the bottom of the lake, was to put pressure on his body on the consciousness level. At the same time, it affected his external body and unearthed his body's potential. This was the process of his body absorbing the medicinal effects. From the beginning, the visualization of water had always been used for this purpose. Then that Shirhuan definitely wasn't playing some puzzle-solving game with him. Instead, it was the same as before, trying to squeeze him dry so that he could unearth his body's potential. Now that he was at the bottom of the lake, what he needed to do was to pull up the stone chains. At the thought of this, Rinpoche made up his mind. If one day wasn't enough, then two. One day he would be able to pull up that stone ring. After a few more days, Rinpoche returned from Earth and took another medicinal bath. He pulled the stone hoop again, and after using all his strength he finally felt as if he could pull it up a little. This made him overjoyed. He knew that he had done the right thing. The stone slab under the stone ring was pulled up a little. There seemed to be a door there. Another day passed. On this day, Rinpoche was lying on his bed practicing the visualization of water. His originally calm body suddenly trembled. Two streams of heat flowed from his kidneys and began to circulate throughout his body. Wherever the two streams of heat flowed, his blood vessels and veins bulged. His muscles also bulged as if there was something swimming under his muscles. As the heat flowed through his body, Rinpoche's body heated up and turned red at the same time. It was as if he was having a high fever. His body temperature quickly rose to 40 degrees Celsius. However, all his sweat pores were tightly shut, and the heat could not be discharged along with his sweat. After a while, Rinpoche's head began to emit a steam-like gas, just like a large kettle. If this was seen by someone on Earth, they would probably think that they were witnessing the legendary 3 flowers at the crown and 5 cheese toward the origin. After a long time, the white gas on Rinpoche's head began to decrease, and his body temperature also dropped. At this moment, Rinpoche slowly woke up. He had just woken up, but he did not feel the feeling of breaking through a bottleneck or advancing in his cultivation. His whole body felt exhausted, thirsty and tired. His mind was not very clear and he only wanted to have a good sleep. He struggled to get up and drank 3 cups of water before falling into a deep sleep on the bed. Rinpoche was woken up by hunger. He could not see the exact time, but the sky was not bright yet. His stomach felt like it was on fire, and every cell in his body was screaming for hunger. He got up from the bed, ran out of the room at lightning speed, picked up a bamboo shoot that was prepared for Tian Tian and Gun Gun, and started to chew on it. The 2 little chaps were woken up by him. When they realized that he was secretly eating their bamboo shoots, they staggered forward and wanted to snatch it back. However, Rinpoche's eyes were glowing green. He even had the intention to roast these 2 chaps. When he saw them, he could smell the smell of meat. Sir Ren. The guards outside were alarmed by the noise inside. They came in to check and found Rinpoche squatting there. His eyes were glowing green and he looked terrifying. Quick, bring me to the imperial kitchen. I'm going to starve to death. Rinpoche had already finished his second bamboo shoot, but his stomach did not feel any better. He knew what he needed. Meat, a lot of meat. When they arrived at the imperial kitchen, Rinpoche did not see any leftovers. Regardless of whether it was vegetables or meat, they were all raw. He chewed on the fruits while getting someone to start the fire and stew the meat. After struggling for 3 hours, Rinpoche ate 2 pots of meat consecutively, which weighed about 15 to 20 kilograms, before the feeling of hunger finally subsided. Rinpoche leaned against the wall and sat on the ground. He really wanted to curse in his heart. The last time he encountered such a situation, it was the same for this breakthrough. The next time he broke through, he must prepare food first. At least, he had to prepare a few kilograms of braised beef. Otherwise, the feeling of hunger from head to toe wasn't something an ordinary person could endure. After resting, Rinpoche picked his teeth while strolling back to Pingle Park. The sky was already bright. At this moment, Rinpoche felt a little uncomfortable. It was as if his body was a lot more relaxed. His legs were light and walking was almost like a moonwalk. When he returned to Pingle Park, he tried running 10 meters in an instant. His speed was much faster than before. If he needed around 13 seconds to run 100 meters previously, he only needed around 8 to 9 seconds now. However, he still felt as if he was not exerting his strength. The sudden change in his body made it difficult for him to control it. At the same time, the speed of his punches had increased a lot. This was especially true for his strength. When Rinpoche returned to Pingle Park and played with the stone dumbbell, his strength had increased by at least 50 kilograms. This meant that he now had more than 600 kilograms of strength. As for his jumping ability, this was the biggest improvement. He was able to jump up a 2-meter tall wall with just 1 step. Rinpoche clenched his fists with a face full of joy. This breakthrough had actually improved his body so much. Following which, he asked the guards to help him test out other aspects of his abilities. He realized that his dynamic vision and reaction time were much faster than before. For example, when he was fighting with Tong Lan previously, he couldn't see her movements clearly. Even if he could see them occasionally, his body couldn't react in time. After the test, Rinpoche was excited for the whole day. He had finally advanced to the man-will level and could be considered a practitioner. Furthermore, his strength had improved a lot. Even though his strength had only increased from 250 kilograms to 600 kilograms, the result of this increase of 100 kilograms was crushing. Needless to say, his speed had increased by 40%, his jumping ability had doubled, and his dynamic vision and reaction time had increased by 30%. If he were to compare his current strength with that of a day ago, Rinpoche felt that he could fight against 3 people effortlessly. A difference of 30% to 40% wasn't considered big, but in fact, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. If he were to fight with his previous self, he would be able to see the movements that he couldn't see clearly previously. He could now dodge the attacks that he couldn't dodge previously. On the other hand, Tong Lan's perspective was the exact opposite. Rinpoche had an excited smile on his face all the way until he stood with Tong Lan at the training ground in the afternoon. First, he played the background music for himself. Theme. As the majestic music sounded, it was as if the prologue of a smoky battlefield had begun. Rinpoche's blood was boiling. After being beaten up by the little Lolita for so long, he could finally take revenge today. He could finally rise up. Even if he still wasn't her match, he wanted to give her a scare. Sir Tong. Rinpoche suddenly put away his previous expression and smiled at the person behind the little Lolita. Then he lowered his body and rushed toward Tong Lan like a leopard. His first move was a series of punches. The little Lolita was startled by his sudden increase in speed and was indeed caught unprepared. However, it was only for a moment. Bang! Rinpoche flew out in an arc and landed heavily on the ground. Sigh, such is life. Rinpoche lay on the ground, looked at the azure sky, and let out a faint sigh. Your strength has improved. The little Lolita was surprised. Rinpoche actually improved so much today compared to the day before yesterday. He actually improved from lying down after 2 moves to lying down after 4 moves, which was a full improvement. Rinpoche opened his mouth and blew a bubble. No matter what, he had already advanced from a level 2 rookie to a level 3 rookie. Furthermore, he discovered a problem during this exchange. His ability to withstand blows had also improved. Previously, when Tong Lan's fists hit his body, it was still very painful. But now it was only slightly painful and much less painful than before. Tong Lan controlled her strength very well and had always used the same amount of strength. In other words, his ability to withstand blows had also improved by a lot. Previously, he was seriously injured by the Empress's small fists and was on the verge of death. The current him should only be seriously injured. Chapter 285. Even though he was lectured by Tong Lan again about why the flowers were so red, he was still delighted. After all, it was one's own strength. The feeling of being stronger than before and being filled with power still filled one with joy. To be honest, stepping into the man-wheel level was only the beginning. It had only been 6 months since he came to this world. To be able to reach this level was already enough to make him happy and a little proud. He was indeed a talent. In just over 6 months, he had already reached the man-wheel level without any foundation. After careful calculation, he realized that he had only been cultivating for 4 months at most. Only 1 in 1,000 practitioners could attain the man-wheel level. This was the difference between geniuses and mortals. Furthermore, if he reached the man-wheel level before Dayo's New Year, it wouldn't be too embarrassing for him to participate in the lantern-grabbing contest. Rinpoche hummed a tune as he arrived at Yangshin Palace Hall. He then heard a cold snort and a voice full of murderous intent. He's courting death. Find out where he is. When Rinpoche entered Yangshin Palace Hall, he saw 2 tall and sturdy men wearing leather armor. The leather armor looked a little old and there were traces of swords and knives on it. You guys can leave first. Find him. The Water Empress said coldly. Yes, Your Majesty. The 2 of them cupped their hands in greeting before turning around and leaving. However, their expressions were somewhat troubled. It would not be easy to find an expert like Lu Pinghai. If he was in Dayo, it would be easy to find him. However, the other party's main activity area was in Great Xia, and it was extremely difficult to find him. When they turned around, Rinpoche realized that they were twins. If he remembered correctly, they should be from the Protectorate of the North. He had seen them from afar in Ping City. After the 2 left, Rinpoche stepped forward and asked, Your Majesty, why are you so angry? I'm looking for Lu Pinghai to exchange for something. I'll even let him ask for anything he wants. As long as it's not too much, I'll agree. However, he thinks too highly of himself and actually rejected me. The Empress was still angry. Rinpoche smiled bitterly. This seemed to be normal. However, this wasn't normal in the eyes of the Empress. The name Lu Pinghai sounded familiar. Rinpoche thought about it carefully and realized that he was the 8th most powerful expert in the world. He had done some homework these few days. Is it very important? Rinpoche probed. The Empress was so angry, and her target was the 8th most powerful expert in the world. Presumably, the item was very important. You can say that. The Water Empress replied. The Spirit Yuan pill was of no use to her and was completely for Rinpoche. At that time, because Rinpoche's physical foundation was too weak, he could only cultivate Rui visualization. Therefore, she asked Hongwu to send someone to look for Lu Pinghai to exchange for a Spirit Yuan pill that could supplement his physical foundation and increase his cultivation speed with the remaining medicinal power. However, Rinpoche actually smoothly reached the most important threshold of Rui visualization and attained the man-will level within a few months. Furthermore, this Rui visualization did have some tricks up its sleeves. It was able to strengthen a person's foundation with such a poor foundation and allow him to enter the man-will level steadily. It was just that the consumption was a little too high. However, whether the elixir was useful or not was one thing, and whether Lu Pinghai would give it to him or not was another matter. She was still quite angry at Lu Pinghai for rejecting her. This was her personality. She had given her conditions, and as long as it wasn't too much, she would agree to it. If you refuse me, I will beat you to death. That Lu Pinghai really doesn't know how to appreciate favors. As long as we find him, throw a bottle of sarin gas at him and bring back the things he has on him. Rinpoche acted like an incompetent advisor. No matter which side he was on, he was definitely on the Empress's side. He just had to remember two things. First, the Empress was always right. Second, please refer to the first thing. The Empress felt very gratified after listening to his words. He relied on the fact that even if someone found him, he would be long gone by the time I arrived. No one else could keep up with his speed. Otherwise, I will meet him personally and see what else he has to say before he dies. The Empress was a little annoyed. Even though she had asked the two brothers to investigate, she knew that it wasn't very meaningful. Rinpoche thought for a while. Without satellites, it wasn't very realistic to use a tracking device. There was no other way. He doesn't have a fixed place? Rinpoche asked curiously. His whereabouts have always been secretive. He only goes to a fishing village in the East Sea for a few days at the end of November every year. That's hard to say. When he goes there again next year, we can just wait there. The Empress nodded her head slightly. Her current goal had already changed. Previously, her goal was to obtain the Spirit Yuan pill. Now her goal was to kill Lu Pinghai. Since this was the case, there was no harm in letting him live for another year. Do you have any candidates for the lantern-grabbing contest? The Empress changed the topic and asked. She really wanted to see how Rinpoche would perform. Can't we just choose a few young imperial guards from the palace? Rinpoche asked in reply. I'm afraid we can't find 9 people below the age of 25 in the palace, the Empress said. There were very few new imperial guards in the palace. Most of them were left behind by the previous emperor. Over the years there were very few replacements. Rinpoche was stunned and his eyes widened. He really didn't expect this problem. He actually couldn't even find 9 people below the age of 25 in the palace. Go and ask Xenja how many imperial guards are below the age of 25 in the palace, the Empress instructed someone behind her. Qing Yuan hurriedly left the hall. After a while, Qing Yuan returned and said to the Empress, Your Majesty, there are 3. The Empress turned to Rinpoche and said, You are still short of 6 people. Think of a way yourself. Rinpoche scratched his head. It was easy to find people because there were so many of them on the streets. However, he couldn't possibly find a few ordinary people to make up the numbers, right? It wouldn't look good on him. Even though he didn't want to win the championship, he couldn't be too embarrassing. It seemed like he had to look for reinforcements. Rinpoche pondered for a while. He was more familiar with the people in the Ministry of Works. It was better to seek help from that old man Tong Jingye. He brought the imperial guards out of the palace and went straight to the Ministry of Works. Only then did he find out that the Ministry of Works didn't have much to do as it was nearing the end of the year. Tong Jingye had already returned home. Rinpoche hurriedly brought his men to the Tong residence. After explaining the purpose of his visit to the gatekeeper, he waited outside. After the time it took to burn 2 incense sticks, Rinpoche was finally brought in. Just a few steps into the door, he saw a little Lolita in white jumping out with a female guard following behind her. Good for nothing, why are you here? The little Lolita was very surprised. In view of the inhumane things that you have done to me, I'm going to deduct the 3,000 taels of silver that I owe your family as compensation for your mental distress. Out of morality, I'm here to inform your grandfather. Rinpoche had a look of, "You are the main culprit" on his face. "It's fine if you call me good for nothing in the palace. Seeing that you are still a child, I won't lower myself to your level. You still dare to call me that outside? Where can I put my face? I specially asked my grandfather and he said that you have given him the money you owe." The little Lolita raised her head and looked at him with disdain. "If he didn't give me the money, I still have to beat him up. Grandfather said that if you don't give me the money, I will beat you to death. I heard that you are going to learn from me in half a month? Heaven and earth are the basis of life. The ancestors are the basis of life. The ruler and the teacher are the basis of governance. Remember to respect your teacher." Rinpoche's face changed into a patient expression. Tong Lan blinked her eyes and looked at him blankly. "What are you talking about?" "A teacher for a day, a father for life. Just remember this. I would like to have another son, but I'm afraid that Her Majesty won't agree." The voice of the old man Tong Jingye sounded faintly from the side. Rinpoche wanted to curse. Damn it. He had forgotten about this. Chapter 286. Rinpoche explained the purpose of his visit to Tong Jingye in the guest room. Tong Jingye stroked his beard and said, "I have a grandson who is 18 years old this year. His strength is pretty good." Rinpoche was originally prepared to borrow a few people with similar strength. He didn't expect Tong Jingye to actually have a grandson. But he seems to have formed a team with a few friends. The second half of Tong Jingye's sentence made Rinpoche swallow the words that he was about to blurt out. "Why are you telling me this when you already have a team? Are you trying to show off that you have a grandson?" Rinpoche started to feel that it was a mistake to look for Tong Jingye. This old man wasn't reliable at all. "Why don't you bring Tong Lan along?" Rinpoche almost choked. He was going to grab a lantern. What was the point of bringing a little loli along? "Look, she's still a bit stronger than you. At the very least you can't beat her. She'll probably think that you're a burden, but with this old man's help, she'll still agree." Over the years, there have also been female teams that have participated in the lantern-grabbing contest. Tong Jingye said as he spread his hands. Tong Jingye's words rendered Rinpoche speechless. He really wasn't a match for that little Lolita. "Lend me a few earth will level servants. The people from the Ministry of Works will do as well. As for Tong Lan, forget about it. It won't be good if she gets hurt while snatching the lanterns," Rinpoche said. Tong Jingye looked at Rinpoche for a long time as if he was looking at a retard. Even Rinpoche felt uncomfortable. "Do you think young people with that level of strength are all cabbages? If he had that kind of strength at that age, he would have joined the army long ago. In the army he would have been worth nurturing. How could he have become a servant?" Those who had such strength at this age were mostly the sons of the imperial court officials or the talented commoners in Lan City. Every year, the young people who perform outstandingly in the lantern-grabbing competition, if they don't have a family background, are immediately recruited into the army or the public order bureau or the monitoring division. Rinpoche was slightly stunned. All the imperial guards in the palace were at the earth wheel level. He was used to seeing them and had forgotten about this point. However, he didn't know the second half of Tong Jingye's words. It turned out that the lantern-grabbing competition was also used to select talented young people. But thinking about it, this was indeed a good idea. Rinpoche suddenly thought of something and asked, "Do we have any examinations like the military selections?" "What is the military selection?" Tong Jingye asked curiously. Tong Jingye stroked his beard and said, "It's almost the same as the Wushu examination in Great Xia. However, Dayo didn't have such a combat examination. This was because in the 70 years since the founding of Dayo, there had only been 3 emperors. The first was the founding emperor Yapeng. During his era, it could be said that there were experts everywhere in Dayo. Any random person from the imperial court was not a weakling. In addition, the lifespans of the aboriginals were long to begin with, so they didn't need to replace the old with the new like in other countries. The imperial court already had its own people, so they didn't pay much attention to the selection of talents. However, that group of people had disappeared along with Yapeng. According to Rinpoche, he was so engrossed in cultivation that his whereabouts were unknown. However, everyone knew that there was definitely something they didn't know. Perhaps only those who had reached Yapeng's level of strength would know. All these years Hong Wu's biggest wish was to find out why that group of people had left and where they had gone. According to his guess, it should be in the depths of the 60,000 mountains. The second emperor was the former emperor. He reigned for the longest time, 42 years. When he succeeded the throne, it was also when Dayo was at its weakest. Almost all the experts of the older generation had left with Yapeng. At that time he had chosen some talents. Some of them were the descendants of the previous experts such as Tong Jinya and Hong Wu. Some of them were young experts that he had chosen from the villages in the 60,000 mountains and were now mainly in the protectorates. One of the more famous ones was Jianghu, the Protector General of the South. He wasn't much weaker than Hong Wu. However, Hong Wu was already more than 60 years old this year, while Jianghu was only 40. It was believed that when Jianghu reached Hong Wu's level of strength, he wouldn't be weaker than Hong Wu. Jianghu's reputation in Dayo was extremely great, especially among the remnant citizens of the Hao nation in the south. After that, it was the Empress. After one of his trips, the former emperor returned with serious injuries. He entrusted his orphan to Hong Wu and then disappeared. At present, the imperial court of Dayo was still filled with the people left behind by the former emperor. Due to these various reasons, Dayo didn't have a talent selection system like Great Xia did. Instead, it was a system similar to a recommendation system. In addition to these historical reasons, there was another important point, which was that most of the commoners weren't educated. The best way out was to advance step by step in places like the army. Although the children of the court officials weren't highly educated, they were at least literate. They were influenced by what they saw since young and were more knowledgeable. After passing certain examinations, they were sent to various departments. After chatting with Tong Jinya for a while, Rinpoche finally understood some of the current patterns in Dayo. In the end, it was because Dayo had only been founded for a short period of time. In addition, the lifespan of the aboriginal experts was too long. For example, Hong Wu, Jianghu, Tong Jinya, Qin Chuan, and the others could almost live to about 200 years old. There was no need to worry about the replacement of the old. As a result, no one realized the problem. It might take another few decades to 100 years for the hidden dangers to emerge. Rinpoche and Tong Jinya chatted for a while. Someone knocked on the door to inform him that it was lunchtime. Rinpoche then realized that it was already noon and hurried back to the palace. On this trip to the Tong residence, Rinpoche's team had 3 more people. They were the little girl, Tong Lan, and Tong Jinya's 2 nephews. There were 3 guards in the palace and 4 people including himself. At present there were only 3 people left. Rinpoche thought about it and thought of someone he knew. However, he didn't know how his situation was and whether he had a team now. It was Du Changkong whom Rinpoche met during the Great Hunt. He showed off his crossbow and ended up causing a lot of trouble. At that time, Rinpoche was prepared to exchange items from Earth for martial arts manuals. In the end, he didn't use them and never saw him again. Even though Du Changkong was a useless teammate, Rinpoche still had a good impression of him. The next day, Rinpoche asked around and went to the Du residence. Rinpoche was considered a well-known figure in Lan City. No matter where he went, as long as people saw the guards around him, they would immediately know who he was. He was the gigolo who brought a group of palace guards around to show off every day. There was no one else but him. Second young master went out just now. Deputy Prefect Rin, why don't you wait in the residence for a while? I will go and look for him now. The burly man who was acting as the gatekeeper cupped his hands and said, No need, just tell me where he is. He might be drinking at Shanhui House at this time. The burly man said, Shanhui House, what a strange name. Do you know where it is? Rinpoche turned his head and asked. It's on Jingyang Street. It's owned by the people of Shanhui Village. Usually many descendants of the court officials go there, Su Wei said. Rinpoche nodded. It's a gathering place for the descendants of the court officials. After a while, Rinpoche appeared in front of a shop with his guards. This shop was inconspicuous and didn't have any signboards. There were only 2 square wooden signs at the door. One of them had the words wine, and the other had the words meat. This is rather interesting. Rinpoche laughed and said to Su Wei, Go up and ask Du Changkong to come down. I won't be going up. That guy is actually here. Someone on the second floor of the restaurant looked down and exclaimed in surprise. Who? Someone at the side craned his neck to take a look. Why is it him? Young Sparrowhawk, your opponent is here. Young Sparrowhawk has so many enemies. How would she know who it is? Someone at the side laughed. The others laughed as well. Lu Ruiyao directly picked up the wine jar and smashed it over. The man pushed the bottom of the jar with his empty hand, and the force that was flying horizontally was suddenly turned upwards by him. Then he caught the falling jar and smiled. Treating me to a drink? I won't stand on ceremony then. Whenever she mentions it, she grits her teeth, but she can't do anything about it. The young man who was looking out of the window earlier turned his head and said. This time, more than 10 people immediately quietened down. Once this was said, everyone knew who it was. These days they had been talking about him a lot. Soon after, everyone had a question. What is he doing here? Is Du Changkong around? Su Wei went up to the second floor and asked. Everyone's gaze immediately turned to a mature-looking man who looked to be in his 30s or 40s. Meh. Du Changkong pointed at himself with his finger. He was a little surprised as he didn't expect Du Changkong to be looking for him. After such a long time, he thought that Du Changkong had already forgotten about him. Chapter 287. Du Changkong did not know why Rinpochen was looking for him. With this thought in mind, he went downstairs and saw Rinpochen standing there with a circle of guards surrounding him. Compared to when they first met, Rinpochen was indeed a lot darker, but he was also a lot more well-dressed. The most important change was that he was full of vigor. Back then, Rinpochen was still somewhat listless and less courageous. He gave off a much more reserved vibe. Now, with the changes in his status, strength and outlook, he was no longer the same as he was in the past. Deputy Prefect Ren. Du Changkong cupped his hands. Brother Du. Rinpochen carefully sized up Du Changkong. He looked mature and mature. Although he was 17 or 18 years old, he looked like he was in his 30s or 40s. He gave off the impression that he was a steady and reliable person. However, after dealing with Du Changkong once, he knew that this was just a facade. Du Changkong was a fraud and a typical pig-like teammate. But who asked him to be short of manpower now? I haven't seen you for a long time. Previously, I said that I would look for Brother Du after I came back. In the end, one thing led to another and I haven't been able to get away. Rinpochen hooked his arm around Du Changkong's shoulder. However, Du Changkong was taller than him by a head and had a strong physique. This made Rinpochen rather uncomfortable and he put his arm down. It's good that Deputy Prefect Rin remembers me. Du Changkong grinned. Why is Deputy Prefect Du looking for me? Du Changkong hesitated for a while before asking. With Rinpochen's current status, he was definitely not here to reminisce about the past. You know about the lantern-grabbing contest during the new year, right? Do you have a team? I'm still short of one person, so I immediately thought of you. After all, we are acquaintances and I'm confident in your abilities. Rinpochen patted him on the shoulder. My brother and I formed a team. We have 4 people. Du Changkong felt a little awkward. In fact, he was well aware of Rinpochen's strength. He could tell at a glance. However, he didn't really care about winning or losing. Friendship came first, competition came second, and participation was the most important. Furthermore, everyone knew that the Empress thought highly of Rinpochen. Since they had interacted with each other before, it would be a good thing to use this opportunity to build a good relationship with him. Even though the Aboriginals were known to be straightforward, they were still capable of such calculations. How's his strength? Rinpochen asked. Slightly worse than me, Du Changkong said after thinking for a while. That's easy. All 4 of you come in. It's settled then. Rinpochen laughed heartily. This was a good thing. For people could come in directly and one of the palace guards could be removed later. Otherwise, if the weakest one was eliminated based on strength, it would be him without a doubt. Other than himself or the palace guards, excluding the Tong clan, Du Changkong and the rest, it would not be good. How should we divide the work? Du Changkong asked. The lantern-grabbing team was usually made up of 10 people, and there were all kinds of roles. For example, the one in charge of opening the way was called Tooth Gate, the one in charge of snatching the lanterns was called Lantern Head, and the one in charge of preventing others from interfering with their own team and interfering with other teams was called Broom Pole. Of course, this was only a rough division. In reality, it was possible that the lamp holder had been killed, and Fang Men or Broom had come forward to snatch the lamp. Just like on the football field, a goalkeeper could also run into the opponent's penalty area to shoot. Let's meet the day after tomorrow, Rinpochen said. Who else is there besides us? Du Changkong asked. Do you know Tong Lan? The granddaughter of the Minister of Works, Sir Tong. When Rinpochen mentioned this name, Du Changkong's expression immediately became weird. It was as if he had a toothache or constipation. Why don't I introduce a few people to you? Du Changkong's face twitched and he seemed to want to retreat. Why? Ren Baqin became curious. Du Changkong had such an expression when he heard Tong Lan's name. Was Tong Lan so powerful? That lass's mouth is too smelly. Furthermore, she is so young and it would be a joke to be in a team with her. Ren Baqin agreed with the first sentence. That lass's mouth was indeed smelly. Ren Baqin patted Du Changkong's shoulder and said, "It doesn't matter if her mouth is smelly or if she is young, but you have to take a long-term view. With your current mentality, you deserve to be single." Du Changkong was dumbfounded. What was Deputy Prefect Ren talking about? It's decided. Let's do it the day after tomorrow morning. The location will be at the training field beside the palace. Ren Baqin decided on this matter. Without waiting for Du Changkong to speak, he immediately got on the four-corned cow and brought everyone back to the palace. Du Changkong rubbed his head. Other things were fine, but that last Tong Lan was really too annoying. When they went upstairs, a few people looked at them and asked, "You have dealings with that person?" "I borrowed a crossbow from him in the past. She knows about it." Du Changkong pointed at Sparrow Hawk. Her face immediately turned black. He was touching a sore spot. Because of that crossbow, she was reprimanded by Ren Baqin, lost face in front of the Empress, and was eventually punished. On the other hand, that person had a meteoric rise. He was even chosen as the Empress's husband. Du Changkong's words were simply a slap to her face. "Why did he look for you?" someone asked curiously. "Lantern grabbing." Du Changkong sat at the side of the table and said in a muffled voice, "He wants to participate in the lantern grabbing?" Everyone was surprised. That person's strength was similar to that of an ant to them. He could be killed with a light punch. Yet, he actually wanted to participate in the lantern grabbing? Was he going to participate in the lantern grabbing or blackmail? Who would dare to touch him? He would probably be sent flying if he was squeezed. Du Changkong nodded his head and did not mention that Ren Baqin's strength had improved tremendously. His strength was equivalent to that of a man-wheel expert in Great Xia. To everyone he was still very weak. "You agreed?" someone asked. "I agreed." Du Changkong spread out his hands. "Umph." A cold snort was heard. Without looking, everyone knew it was Lu Ruoyao. "I'm afraid that you won't even be able to get close to him." Lu Ruoyao sneered. "That's none of your business." Du Changkong wasn't a kind person. He was only afraid of Hong Xian. He didn't really care about Lu Ruoyao. Lu Ruoyao was so angry that she gritted her teeth. She was prepared to look for Hong Xian in a while. Originally, Hong Xian said that she wouldn't participate this year. However, since that person dared to participate, Hong Xian might be interested. She wouldn't be able to touch him during normal times. However, since he dared to participate in the lantern grabbing contest, he couldn't be blamed if he got seriously injured with just a light touch. In fact, she wasn't the only one who had this thought. After all, the Empress was the idol of many people in Dayo. Ren Baqin was still hated by many people. When they heard this news, several of them wondered if they would accidentally lightly touch him when the time came. Even though the others had this thought in their minds, they didn't show it. 2 days later, Ren Baqin left the palace early in the morning and went straight to the training field. At this time it was time to change shifts and there weren't many people there. When he arrived, Du Changkong was already there with 3 other people beside him. 4 of them were squatting by the wall, eating a super large burrito in their hands. "Deputy Prefect Ren." Du Changkong stood up and greeted Ren Baqin when he saw him. "Brother Du." Ren Baqin got off his four-corned cow and sized up the other 3 people. They looked a little like Du Changkong, but they weren't as old as Du Changkong. Those who didn't know would think that it was a father bringing his 3 sons out. "Du Changyue, Du Changqing and Du Changjiang are all my brothers. Deputy Prefect Ren, call me by my name. Otherwise I'll feel awkward." Du Changkong introduced them in a low and muffled voice. "Nice to meet you." Ren Baqin cupped his fists. The few of them quickly returned the greeting and sized up this legendary figure curiously. "That girl isn't here yet?" Ren Baqin turned his head to look. The few of them waited for more than an hour before they finally saw the few of them. Tong Lan was standing on the back of a four-corned cow. When she got closer, she flipped over and jumped down. She stretched out her finger and pointed at Ren Baqin. With a face full of displeasure, she said, "You are such a good-for-nothing, yet you still dare to participate in the lantern-grabbing contest? You even persuaded Grandpa to let me team up with you. I might as well watch the show while eating fruits at the side since I can't win anyway." And these few, even though they are slightly better than you, they are still good for nothings. If I team up with all of you, others will easily think that I'm the same kind of trash as you. I'm still so young, how am I going to face others in the future? Tong Lan pointed at Rinpochen, the Du brothers, and the two young men who were smiling bitterly behind her. Can you beat her? Rinpochen turned his head and asked Du Changkong. Du Changkong looked like he was in pain, but he couldn't flare up. In the end, he shook his head sullenly. If Rinpochen hadn't been staring at him, he wouldn't have noticed it. Rinpochen widened his eyes. Du Changkong actually couldn't beat this girl? I still thought that she was only slightly more talented than ordinary children. In addition, she had been nurtured since young, so her martial arts were slightly better than ordinary children. That was why the Empress allowed her to be his sparring partner. It turned out that she wasn't a little girl but a demoness. He had actually been tricked by the Empress for so long? To think that he had always felt that he couldn't even beat a 10-year-old child? It turned out that he wasn't alone. Chapter 288. Early in the morning, a group of people were scolded by a little lowly, but they couldn't refute her. Their faces were twitching, and their faces were as black as the bottom of a pot. Only Rinpochen was in a good mood and was almost humming a tune. Anyway, I'm not alone. Although you guys are a bunch of trash, since Grandpa has spoken, I will reluctantly bring you guys to participate in this lantern-grabbing contest. Just don't drag me down. After thinking for a while, she sighed and said with an aggrieved face, It's impossible for a bunch of good-for-nothings like you to not hold me back. This is my first time participating in the lantern-grabbing contest, and I've already been ruined by you. Friendship comes first, competition comes second. The most important thing is to participate. Rinpochen added. The four Du brothers nodded in unison, like chicks pecking at grains. Tong Lan squinted at him and said, That's how a loser comforts himself. If we can get first place, why should we get second place? Rinpochen lowered his head, looked at Tong Lan, sighed slightly and said, Until now you still don't know the true meaning of lantern grabbing. Do you think so many people are grabbing lanterns just to decide the champion? Tong Lan looked up with a look of disdain. Don't tell me you're going there to make friends. Not entirely, but you are still too young to understand the meaning behind it. I understand very well. Rinpochen continued to speak with a doting expression on his face. Tong Lan really wanted to give him a kick. Everyone looked at Rinpochen to see what he had to say. The purpose of this lantern-grabbing activity is to educate the Aboriginal youths through sports without any discrimination and with the lantern-grabbing spirit, to promote mutual understanding in the spirit of excellence, unity, and fair competition. Thus, to contribute to a peaceful and better world. It could be summarized as peace, friendship, and progress. Du Changkong, everyone was shocked. They never thought that a lantern-grabbing contest could have such a profound meaning. Rinpochen waved his arms. Our slogan is, higher, faster, stronger. Sir Rin is still the one who sees things clearly. Peace, friendship, and progress are the objectives of our participation in the lantern-grabbing contest. Higher, faster, and stronger are our watchwords. Du Changkong immediately applauded. Everyone was stunned. Are we talking about the same thing as the two of you? Why did he feel that something was not quite right? Rinpochen didn't care whether they believed him or not. In any case, he had to say it this way. In a while, he would discuss with Her Majesty about pasting this motto and slogan all over Lan City. Alright, since everyone is here, let's talk about the arrangements. Tong Lan will be the lantern head to snatch the lantern, I will be the tooth door to open the path, and the two from the Tong family, Sulu and Jianghu, will be the broom on the left and right to protect Tong Lan. Du Changkong and the rest of you will be the roaming sentries to prevent the enemy's roaming sentries from approaching and provide support to the broom, Rinpochen said as he clapped his hands. Sulu and Jianghu were the two guards in the palace. This was a relatively common arrangement. However, the lantern-grabbing competition was not a football competition. Most of the time, there would be a chaotic battle towards the end. There were only two key players. One was Toothgate, who was in charge of clearing the path for the lantern grabbers. If Toothgate was blocked, the entire team would be hindered. The other was the lamp holder. The lamp holder was placed under the shelf. The main thing to look at was the lamp holder. It was not allowed for the lamp holder to pass through the Toothgate and go to the lamp stand alone. One must have the Toothgate or two brooms by their side, otherwise they would be eliminated. Just like on the battlefield, a general couldn't just abandon his army and charge into the enemy's formation alone, right? The rules of the lantern-grabbing competition were also the most basic way to cultivate teamwork and combat habits. As a result, it was often held in the army. It wasn't only held during the new year, but it wasn't usually so grand. In Dayo, the lantern-grabbing competition was equivalent to modern football. The lamp holder was generally the strongest in the team, followed by the tooth gate. Everyone didn't have any objections to Tong Lan being the lamp holder, but Ren Baqin being the tooth gate shocked everyone. "You are going to be the tooth gate?" Tong Lan widened her eyes in disbelief. "Do you want me to carry you, a burden, to the lamp stand?" Ren Baqin waved his hand and said, "Don't look down on me. I have already made arrangements. When the time comes, I won't be a burden. No one can stop me." "Do you believe this?" Tong Lan widened her eyes and questioned him. "I can't use weapons, but I can wear armor, right?" Ren Baqin retorted. "Even if you wrap yourself up like a turtle, will it be of any use?" "Humph, I will let all of you see what it means to be unstoppable." Ren Baqin looked very confident. Although the Aboriginals were very powerful and those who participated in the lantern-grabbing competition weren't mediocre. However, even a tiger wouldn't be able to swallow a hedgehog. Everyone stared at him, wanting to know where this mysterious confidence of his came from. Tong Lan puffed up her bun face and said dejectedly, "It's over. I can't even get close to the lampstand in my first lantern-grabbing competition. It's so embarrassing. If people bring this up in the future, it will be a dark history. Tomorrow I will get a cloth to cover my face." She learned the term dark history from Ren Baqin. Ren Baqin looked at her bun face and wanted to pinch it, but he didn't dare to. He reckoned that he would have to participate in the lantern-grabbing competition with a cast. "Today is just a meeting. Don't worry too much. Even if we can't win, I won't blame you. Like I said before, friendship comes first, competition comes second. Our goal is to go higher, faster and stronger." Everyone continued to look at him. "It's because of you that we can't win. Otherwise there might be a little bit of hope. With you around, that little bit of hope is gone. Next, let's meet here at noon on the first day of the Lunar New Year and participate in the lantern-grabbing competition together," Ren Baqin said to them. Everyone nodded except for Tong Lan, who was still grumbling unhappily like a chatterbox. However, Ren Baqin ignored her. The lantern-grabbing competition usually started at around 7 o'clock in the evening. Usually, people would arrive at around 5 o'clock in advance to participate. Ren Baqin arrived 4 hours earlier because he wanted to discuss it again. Even if it was a last-minute preparation, it would still be beneficial. "Everyone, see you in 5 days." Ren Baqin cupped his hands at everyone and left on his fork-horned cow with the guards. Tong Lan looked at Ren Baqin leaving and snorted. In a flash, she landed on the back of the fork-horned cow. Without waiting for the other two people, she rode the fork-horned cow back. After everyone left, Du Chongqing said, "It doesn't seem very reliable." "It doesn't matter. In any case, we didn't expect to win," Du Chongqing said. Everyone nodded their heads. During the lantern-grabbing competition, there were indeed many capable people. A few outstanding people from the younger generation would participate. After all, this was also an opportunity to showcase the strength of the next generation. Compared to those people, the few of them were indeed not enough. The next day, notices were pasted all over Lan City. Many people surrounded them curiously, waiting for someone to explain what was written on them. The person in the middle had a strange expression on his face as he said, "This notice says that this year's lantern-grabbing event is to educate the Aboriginal youths through sports that are free of any discrimination and have the lantern-grabbing spirit. The spirit of excellence, unity, fair competition, and mutual understanding. Thus, they will contribute to a peaceful and better world. In short, peace, friendship, and progress. Not only this year, but this will also be the purpose of future lantern-grabbing competitions." Towards the end, his voice was almost like the buzzing of a mosquito. When he said the first few sentences, the entire place became dead silent. Everyone was dumbfounded. What was he saying? Chapter 289. Half a month before the new year, Ren Baqin could feel the festive atmosphere everywhere in Lan City. There was a bustling crowd everywhere, and he could always see many Aboriginals bringing mountain products into Lan City to exchange for various supplies. Even in the vicinity of Jianghu district and Yuelu district, there were many people sitting by the roadside with a few things they brought out from the mountains in front of them. There were herbs, baby animals, and even rare treasures. As a result, there was a sea of people in the vicinity every day, just like a market. Everyone had a smile on their face. After all, for most people the New Year was the most important time of the year. After hearing about the market, Rinpoche made 2 trips to see some strange things in this world. He even bought some small things that he found interesting, such as a green stone. In the dark he could see small dots emitting white light on it like stars. For example, there was a plant that bloomed every other day with a flower bud at the top. It bloomed on the first day, closed on the second day, and opened again on the third day. It kept blooming and closing like this, which was very interesting. There was also a kind of animal horn that was said to be able to travel hundreds of kilometers after being blown. However, humans couldn't hear it and only certain animals could. In contrast to the liveliness in Lan City, the palace was deserted. A palace gate separated the inside and the outside world into 2 different worlds. The Empress didn't seem to care much about the New Year. Everything in the palace was going on as usual, and everyone else was doing their own things without any decorations or preparations. After all, the Empress had always been the only person in the palace, and there was no one to talk to or share with. As a result, such a festival had no meaning other than the New Year to the Empress. However, there was one more person this year, so it was somewhat different. "Your Majesty, why don't we decorate the palace as well?" Rinpoche suggested when he saw the Empress sitting there watching a television series. When he passed by Beihang district, he saw that many of the mansions of the court officials were being cleaned and decorated. It was a very strange arrangement. Many bones were drilled into holes, tied with a piece of cloth and hung on the wall. When the wind blew, there would be whimpering sounds and the sound of bones knocking on the wall. The entire Beihang district was filled with a quiet breeze. Every time Rinpoche passed by these 2 days, he would shiver and feel that the surrounding air seemed to be a little colder. How was this a festive occasion? It was like a haunted house. Was this done to scare people? He didn't know who was such a genius to actually think of such a creative New Year decoration. However, the people in the mansions all looked happy, which made him feel weird. The Empress gently propped her chin with her finger, looked at him and said indifferently, "Do what you want." Rinpoche bade farewell to the Empress and returned to Earth. When he came back he brought along 2 big bags filled with colorful LED lights and bells. Now that he had more than 600 gene of strength, he could carry a lot more things at once. It was several times more than before, and he didn't have to be so restricted every time he carried things. He first asked people to make a few wooden frames and erected them on both sides of Yangxin Palace Hall. He then called for Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan to get busy in Yangxin Palace Hall. They connected the colorful lanterns in the air and hung up the bells. Even though the task wasn't complicated, they still had to run from both sides. Out of the 3 of them, 2 of them stood on the racks while Rinpoche ran back and forth between the 2 racks with a roll of lanterns. He handed one end of the lanterns to one of the racks and then pulled it to the other end. The Empress was watching a television series, but she was not in the mood to watch it. From time to time she would look at the 3 busy people at the bottom of the stairs in a daze. It seemed like it had not been lively for a long time. Or rather, it had never been lively. Yangxin Palace Hall had always been cold and cheerless. Even when she was young and her father was here it was the same. Even she felt that it should be like this. Therefore Rinpoche's busy schedule made her feel novel, interesting and warm. The Empress did not realize that she had a smile on her face. It took them half a day to connect the light strips. Rinpoche plugged them in and the colors of the entire Yangxin Palace Hall began to change. From the moment they entered, the 2 sides and the top were covered with light strips, emitting colorful rays of light. Furthermore, the rays of light seemed to be flowing. This kind of light strip only weighed 18 kilograms per 100 meters. Rinpoche brought a total of 2,000 meters and made the entire Yangxin Palace Hall colorful. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan didn't know what the 2 of them were doing, but they almost screamed when they saw the scenery. At this moment Yangxin Palace Hall was no longer cold and cheerless. It was filled with fascinating colors. Even the Empress was pleasantly surprised. She didn't expect that she would be so beautiful and dazzling after finishing it. Not only that, Rinpoche also got someone to cut down 2 trees and place them near the Empress's bed. He then wrapped the light strips around the trees. "Your Majesty, this is the palace that belongs to you." Rinpoche wiped the perspiration off his forehead. He had been running back and forth while carrying such a heavy lantern belt. It was quite tiring for him. However, looking at the colorful Yangxin Palace Hall, which looked like a palace from a fairy tale, he was very satisfied. The Empress was pleasantly surprised and her heart was filled with tenderness. For a moment she did not know what to say. After a long time she said softly, "It's very beautiful. I like it very much." Rinpoche's heart softened when he heard the Empress's gentle voice. This was probably the most romantic thing he had done in his life so far. However, I'm afraid the battery pack is not enough. I brought back another set of batteries. Together with the previous 4 sets of batteries, it can only last for 5 hours. Rinpoche felt slightly regretful. He felt that it was a pity that such a beautiful scenery couldn't be lit up all the time. Previously he did not bring too many batteries with him. He prepared a total of 4 sets of batteries to sustain the Empress's use for watching television dramas, table lamps and charging the walkie-talkie. This time he brought another set of batteries which made up for only 5 sets. It seemed like he had to bring back a battery with a larger capacity next time. Following which Rinpoche, Qing Yuan, and Hong Yuan hung countless silver bells on the light strips. As the breeze blew, the entire Yangshin Palace Hall was filled with the melodious sound of the bells. This sound was much better than the ghostly wails and howls of the bone whistles in the air above the residences in Beihong district. Then the Empress listened to the silver bells for an entire night and almost couldn't fall asleep. It was really too noisy. She didn't feel it during the day, but it became apparent in the dead of night. However, the Empress still didn't allow anyone to remove the silver bells. The next day it was as if nothing had happened. Chapter 290. Yesterday, a reader asked in the book review section why it had become 3 stars. I only realized it after that. There were originally just over 100 reviews, but it was directly increased to over 5,000 reviews. I'm Really a Superstar only had a rating of over 2,000, the Cultivation group only had a rating of over 1,800, and Nanny Dad only had a rating of over 500. My book actually had over 5,000 reviews, which was 10 times more than Nanny Dad and more than twice as much as a Superstar. The reviews had been increased to 3 stars. In this world, there were always some people who wanted to drag others down when they couldn't do it themselves. Never underestimate the dark psychology of some people. Maybe they just didn't like you, or for some other reason they would plot against you. There were many disputes when people became famous, but the problem was that I wasn't famous yet, so why was I in such a hurry to reveal my true colors? So, readers who could give reviews, please help me pull the ratings down a little. Tomorrow I'll see if the editor can delete those reviews that have been increased. Chapter 292. The only activity that Rinpoche had during his first New Year's in the other world was a hot pot meal at Yangshin Palace Hall. The hot pot base from Earth was combined with natural, unpolluted wild vegetables and fresh meat from the other world. This was the first time the products of the 2 worlds were closely combined. The resulting taste was also unparalleled. Of course, the most important thing was who he was with. The right time and the right person are doing a right thing. For example, at this moment, Rinpoche was looking at the Empress and giggling foolishly. Just by looking at the focus in his eyes and his body swaying, one could tell that he had drunk too much. The Empress didn't look much different from usual, but her face was slightly flushed. It was obvious that she had drunk quite a bit. The blush on her face made her look even more gorgeous. There were 4 bottles of wine on the ground, 1 for Rinpoche and 3 for the Empress. However, Rinpoche disappointingly drank too much. Your Majesty, let me tell you. Coming here and meeting you is probably the best thing I've done in my life. I've used up all the good fortune from my next life in this one, and I've accepted it. Rinpoche's speech was somewhat unclear. However, the Empress didn't mind. She liked to hear these words. I have to thank the heavens. He has arranged so many things in this life, but this is the one that I am most satisfied with. I'm truly grateful. I have to burn incense for him, place 3 animals as well as fruits and vegetables. This is called offering sacrifices to the heavens. Rinpoche continued. Actually, it's almost the same as giving red packets through the back door. They've already done something for you, so you have to pay them back. Otherwise, who would care about you? Right? The same goes for the heavens. The Empress poured herself a cup of wine and quietly listened to him boasting. Not long after, she downed another bottle of wine. After nagging for a long time, Rinpoche finally got tired. The Empress asked someone to pack up the things while she curled up on the sofa to watch a television series. Out of nowhere, she took out a bag of popcorn. Up until now, Rinpoche didn't know how much food she had saved. In any case, she would curl up on the sofa and eat snacks while watching television series from time to time. The hall was very spacious and the voice from the laptop echoed in the hall. However, there was another voice in the hall that was very abrupt. Phew. Phew. The Empress glanced at him from time to time. Rinpoche sat on the floor, leaned against the sofa and fell asleep. Send him back to Pingle Park. The Empress waved her hand. Yes. Qing Yuan looked at the computer reluctantly. It was the crucial moment. The Empress curled up on the sofa. She raised her head and looked at the colorful lights above her. She was very satisfied and continued to watch the television series. The next day Rinpoche woke up with a headache. He asked someone to brew him a cup of green vine powder and felt much better after drinking it. Today was the first day of the year in this world, and today was the day of the lantern-grabbing event. Looking at the time, it was still a little early. Rinpoche took out 2 boxes from under the bed, opened them, checked them, and then closed the boxes. Rinpoche strolled over to Yangxing Palace Hall to meet the Empress. It was rare for the Empress to wake up late. When Rinpoche arrived, she had just woken up. Her eyes were still groggy and her mental state wasn't very good, which was very rare. Your Majesty, you stayed up late watching TV series again? Rinpoche lamented. A dash. The Empress let out a light yawn. The usually domineering Empress now looked like a kitten when she yawned. How's the preparation for the lantern-grabbing event going? The Empress asked casually. Wait and see my heroic performance. Rinpoche gave her a thumbs up. Even his teeth were shining. It gave off a sense of Mike McKay. After hearing what he said, the Empress became a little more spirited. She looked at Rinpoche, who was full of confidence, and finally shook her head. As long as he wasn't too miserable, it was fine. The Empress already knew who was in Rinpoche's team and how they were arranged. Regarding the matter of Rinpoche being a toothpick, the Empress had reservations. In her heart, it was fine as long as she could put on airs. After lunch, Rinpoche returned to Pingle Park. First, he put on a set of tight-fitting clothes. That set of armor could only be worn by the tight-fitting clothes. Then he put on a robe. Before he could even move, he felt unbearably hot. During winter in Lan City, the temperature was at least 23 or 24 degrees Celsius. Usually he could barely wear a robe, but with the tights he would be sweating. However, when the time came, he couldn't possibly run around naked and change his attire. After all, the sorceress still had the holy light, and he would be an infantryman without a horse. After getting someone to hang the 2 boxes on the back of the fork-horned cow, Rinpoche brought his men to the training field outside the palace. He and the Du brothers were right behind each other. The Du brothers were wearing animal skin underpants, and their upper bodies were also made of animal skin. From their left shoulder to their right waist, the right half of their body was filled with bulging muscles. Thick blue veins and blood vessels crossed the surface of their muscles, making them look like dragons. Just by looking at their appearance, Rinpoche gave them a score of 9. If he gave them a score less, they would become arrogant. However, when he thought about how they couldn't even defeat a little Lolita, Rinpoche felt that they were really too useless. Then the 5 of them squatted down in a corner. It was cooler here. Who's going to buy a bowl of shaved ice? Suwei, find someone to buy a few bowls of shaved ice. Don't collapse before the competition starts, Rinpoche shouted at the top of his lungs. In fact, he was the only one sweating profusely. After a few months, shaved ice had become a relatively common sight in Lan City. It was rare for caretaker Sher to have a business acumen. He opened 10 stores in one go and had shaved ice in almost every district. After a while, Rinpoche and the others squatted down in a row in a corner and ate shaved ice intermittently. After waiting for a full hour, Tong Lan finally arrived. She was accompanied by 2 other young men from the Tong family. One was called Tong Tai Ho, and the other was called Tong Tai Cheng. These 2 followed Tong Lan's lead. One look and anyone could tell that they were 2 good-for-nothings. Tong Lan stood on the back of the bull. Her white satin clothes fluttered in the wind. In addition to her good looks, she really looked like a fairy. Why do you always stand on the back of the bull? Rinpoche was curious. Tong Lan looked at Rinpoche as if he was a piece of trash and ignored him. Is it because you are shorter when you sit on the back of the bull? Or is it because you look more high-end and classy when you stand on the back of the bull? Rinpoche irresponsibly guessed. Tong Lan looked up and continued to ignore him. Tong Tai Ho and Tong Tai Cheng gave Rinpoche a thumbs up. Rinpoche's eyes widened. Was this really the reason? Sure enough, no matter what kind of Lolita she looked like, she would have a Chinibu period. Especially for someone as strong as Tong Lan. Do you want to play Gamoku? Rinpoche waved his hand. What's Gamoku? The little Lolita immediately revealed a curious look. After all, she was a little girl and was full of curiosity. Come like this. Rinpoche drew a Gamoku board on the ground and taught everyone how to play. Gamoku was very easy to learn. Even the aboriginals could easily learn it with their IQ. After a short while, Rinpoche and the little Lolita were playing Gamoku with a group of onlookers. Childish. Tong Lan, who had lost 10 games in a row, had a face full of contempt. You are already so old, yet you still play such a childish game. No wonder you are so useless. Sir Rin, why are we here so early today? Du Changkong touched the back of his head and finally remembered something. Didn't they agree to discuss the tactics for tonight? Why were they playing Gamoku in the afternoon? When the time comes, both of us will rush forward and you guys will cover us, Rinpoche casually said. With our strength and my meticulous preparation, if we don't crush them, we will be crushed. I have thought for a few days and feel that there is no need to make any arrangements. Everyone will improvise on the spot. Everyone looked at him from the corner of their eyes. They would definitely be crushed. Chapter 293. The lantern-grabbing contest had a long history in Dayo. In the past, it was often held by 2 or 3 villages in the 60,000 mountains. After the establishment of Dayo, many aboriginal commoners came down from the mountains to live in the city. As the population grew, the scale of the lantern-grabbing contest increased. This was especially true for Lan City, the capital of Dayo. The lantern-grabbing contest on the first day of the new year was considered the most eye-catching event in the whole of Dayo. In the afternoon, people from the nearby mountains started to arrive at Lan City one after another. Almost all of them set off in the morning and stayed in the city overnight just to witness this grand event. Even though the residents of Lan City would participate every year, they wouldn't miss out on the biggest event of the year. Even the merchants and envoys from other countries in Lan City would be watching from the side. Of course, there were no seats, the kind that squeezed together with civilians. Regardless of whether it was the Empress or the people in the imperial court, from top to bottom, no one cared about what the envoys from the other nations thought. In fact, among the envoys from the 3 countries, only Great Xia's Gu Zicheng was slightly valued. It wasn't because Great Xia was the most powerful. It was because Gu Zicheng had lived the longest. Gu Zicheng had been safe and sound in Lan City for more than 10 years, and it wasn't just because he kept a low profile. Perhaps even the person who sent him here didn't expect him to live this long. One had to know that Dayo's envoys didn't just have to stay in Lan City for a while. They had to step in when the caravans of their respective nations met with mishaps in Lan City. They also had to step in when other nations had issues that involved Dayo. If they were not careful, they would lose their heads. At most, the Empress would just find an excuse to dismiss them. If they didn't handle this matter properly and lost face for their country, they wouldn't be able to get any benefits either. It would even affect their families. Basically, a diplomatic mission to Dayo was equivalent to having one foot in the gates of hell. For example, the envoy from the Rising Cloud Nation had been beheaded within a year of his mission. It had only been a month since the new envoy arrived. Gu Zicheng's ability to stay in Lan City for more than a decade was admirable. It was all thanks to Gu Zicheng's talent and resourcefulness. Even Shi Qing was puzzled as to why Great Xia had left such a talent in Dayo for more than 10 years. Could it be that Great Xia really had so many talents? Gu Zicheng was sitting in the carriage. When the carriage rolled over the stone slabs, the inside of the carriage would be a little bumpy. Listening to the noise outside, Gu Zicheng's expression was a little gloomy. He already knew about the 7th prince's death. He had also found out about Great Xia's current preparations through some channels. He didn't know if he would be buried here in the end. Thinking about it, more than 10 years had passed and the people in his hometown had changed. It seemed that being buried here was not that bad. Or should he seek refuge with Dayo? This idea popped up in Gu Zicheng's mind, but he immediately suppressed it, because he still had the Gu family behind him. When he arrived, it was not too late. Previously, some guards had already come to take up space. Next to him were the new envoys from the Yun Nation and the Qin Nation. The 3 of them could be considered brothers in hardship. At this time, Gu Zicheng's face had already regained its tranquil smile. He nodded lightly at the 2 of them as a greeting. Their seats weren't too bad. On one side was the Aboriginal official's seat, and on the other side was a sea of human heads. In front of them was a huge empty field surrounded by grass ropes. The field was 4,000 feet long and 700 feet wide. In the middle was a huge wooden frame. It was 20 feet wide and 8 feet tall. It was divided into 7 levels, each smaller than the previous one. The top level was only 20 feet wide. This entire frame was called the lampstand. On that level there was a square platform with a red lantern on it. The winner would be the one who obtained the lantern within the specified time. In this lantern-grabbing contest, only one team would be the winner, and the rest would be the losers. There was no second or third place. On both sides of the lantern platform, there were 26 teams, 13 teams on each side. Both teams were the same distance away from the lantern platform, which was about 6,000 feet. 18 of the teams were formed by the descendants of officials, while the other 8 were formed by commoners. In the 70 years since the founding of Dayo, commoners had only obtained the lantern 10 times. 2 or 3 of these times, the descendants of officials had suffered losses on both sides. The remaining few times were the dark horses. The most recent one was 6 years ago. Rinpoche recognized one of the dark horses in that team, the simple-minded Xiong Pai. Almost all the others had been recruited into the army. The dark horses that appeared in every lantern-grabbing contest attracted the most attention. Every time they would be discussed enthusiastically for a long time. Many people wanted to see if there were any dark horses this year. Even if they didn't obtain the lantern in the end, if they performed well, they would still be respected. Moreover, the Empress and the court officials would also be watching. Because of these reasons, the lantern-grabbing contest was the biggest stage for the Aboriginals. It wasn't only the commoners but also the descendants of officials. They wanted to show off, let the elders in their families value them more, or win honor for their families. The waiting area for the participants was relatively quiet. Even those who were more ambitious were conserving their energy. After all, even Hong Xian and Shi Yueya, who were relatively famous in this generation, weren't strong enough to suppress the others. Furthermore, there were a few opponents who were of similar strength. Needless to say, most of the others were still a little nervous. However, there were also exceptions. For example, there were a few people who were surrounding the city. Among them they could still make sounds like, I jump, I jump, I jump again. This caused the people who weren't far away to stretch their necks to see what these people were doing. Childish. Tong Lan had a look of disdain on her face. You're already so old, yet you're still playing such a childish game. Useless. After she finished speaking, she snorted, turned around and left with her head held high. Rinpoche looked at the grids and small wooden blocks on the ground and sighed. This little lass was getting harder and harder to deceive. She stopped playing Gamoku after losing 10 games in the afternoon. This time around she stopped playing Chinese checkers after losing 9 games. Du Changkong, who was at the side, was cheerfully accompanying her. In any case, it didn't matter if he lost. The most important thing was to participate. Rinpoche threw the small wooden block in his hand to one side, got up and looked into the distance. Behind the torches in the distance, there was a dense mass of people. There was also a very loud noise coming from that direction. It made people wonder if more than half of the people in Lan City were here. The waiting area wasn't partitioned. In fact, it was a large piece of open space outside the city that was temporarily roped off. 2 teams were separated by a rope, and the surrounding people could see it clearly. For example, the team beside him consisted of 10 women. Hong Xian was the leader of the team. Among them, there was a person who was sneering at him. Wasn't that Lu Ruoyao, whom he had verbally refuted to the point where she doubted her life? He didn't know if he should say that enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road or if someone had deliberately arranged this. Wasn't this just looking for trouble? He couldn't possibly hit a woman, right? Even though Aboriginal women were very valiant, they were still women. After thinking about it, Rinpoche decided not to hit them. If he really couldn't get over it, he would at most gently push them aside a little. Other than Hong Xian and Lu Ruoyao, there were 8 other young ladies. They all had different appearances, but they all had hot bodies. They frequently sized up Rinpoche. This person actually dared to participate in the lantern-grabbing contest. Even though he was slightly stronger than the rumors said, it was still negligible. They didn't know whether to say that he was bold or that he didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Yaozi would probably teach him a lesson later. On the other side, Rinpoche didn't recognize any of them. However, he heard from Du Changkong that the rest of the people in that team were alright, but there were 2 people who were only slightly weaker than Hong Xian. One of them was called Qin Haoyong and the other was Qin Kuan. The former was the youngest son of the Minister of War, Qin Chuan, and the latter was his grandson. Rinpoche carefully sized them up and couldn't help but sigh. Qin Chuan was also a talent. However, the others didn't think much of it. After all, the Aboriginals had a relatively long lifespan, especially the strong ones. It wasn't rare for a family of 5 or 6 generations to live under the same roof. Two people who looked about the same age might actually have a difference of 2 generations. Qin Haoyong seemed to have sensed Ren Baqian's gaze. He turned around and nodded his head in a friendly manner. Ren Baqian was slightly astonished. After all, he was the first person with such strength to participate in the lantern-grabbing contest. Ren Baqian nodded his head as well. Then he turned around and asked Du Changkong, "How much longer do we have?" "Less than the time it takes for an incense stick to burn." Du Changkong looked in another direction and replied. "Less than the time it takes for an incense stick to burn." That was about 20 minutes. Ren Baqian felt that he could start preparing now. After all, he still needed some time to put on that set of armor. Ren Baqian placed the 2 boxes side by side and said to the others, "Come over and surround me. Help me block them." He felt that after preparing for so long, it was necessary for him to give the others a surprise. Therefore he could only reveal it at the last moment. The others were puzzled and surrounded him. With 8 burly men surrounding him, they basically couldn't see anything from the outside. Only then did Ren Baqian laugh mischievously as he took off his robe, revealing the tight-fitting clothes underneath. Following which, he opened the box at his feet. Everyone had been curious about what was inside the box. They reckoned that it was what he relied on to be the tooth gate. However, no matter how hard they racked their brains, they couldn't figure out what was inside. One had to know that no matter what kind of weapon it was forbidden to use it. Apart from the weapon, whatever was inside the box wouldn't be of much use. However, when the group of people saw what Ren Baqian took out, they immediately gasped. Only then did they realize that they were still too naive. Everyone was dumbfounded. "Sir Ren, will this really work? Isn't this against the rules?" "Of course it will work," Ren Baqian replied confidently. "This was armor, right? Since it was armor, there was nothing wrong with it." In any case, the rules didn't say that it wasn't allowed. As for whether the rules would allow it in the future, it was none of his business. "What's that? Let me see, let me see." Not long after the little Lolita left in a huff, she saw this group of people gathering together mysteriously and making such noises. She couldn't help but squeeze her way through the crowd. "Wastrel, what's that?" Once the little Lolita saw what Ren Baqian was wearing, she widened her eyes and exclaimed. Tong Lan's voice attracted the attention of the 2 teams at the side. However, a row of burly men blocked their view so they couldn't see anything. "Humph, it doesn't matter what tricks they have up their sleeves," Lu Royao sneered. At the lantern-grabbing contest, only strength mattered. Other than that, other tricks were just for the sake of making others laugh. Although her parents had already warned her, she was still determined to teach Ren Baqian a lesson later. At most she wouldn't be so obvious. Hong Xian sat quietly at one side. She paused for a moment as her gaze swept across Tong Lan's body. After thinking about it, she swallowed the words she wanted to say. "Lower your voice." Ren Baqian raised his index finger to warn Tong Lan before continuing to wear the box. Looking at Ren Baqian like a porcupine, the little Lolita rolled her eyes a few times before curling up. She covered her mouth with one hand and snickered. This was really too fun. The expressions of those people would definitely be very interesting. As for whether it was against the rules or not, she didn't care as long as it was fun. At the side of the lantern stand, the Empress was sitting on a chair. Behind her were Xanzhi, Qin Yuan, and Hong Luan. This was the best position to have a clear view of both the left and right sides. On both sides of her sat the civil and military officials of the imperial court. Behind them were some family members. "Your Majesty, will anything happen to Deputy Prefect Ren for participating in this lantern-grabbing contest?" Shi Qing asked rather worriedly. He wasn't afraid of anything else, but he was afraid that something would really happen to that person. At that time, it wasn't impossible for the Empress to strike. However, if the Empress really did that, the lantern-grabbing contest would be in chaos. "We will know in a while," the Empress casually said, but she was feeling somewhat uncertain. At that time, she only wanted to see Ren Baqian do this for her and didn't think too much about it. However, as the time was getting closer and closer, she started to worry. Thinking of that fellow's confident look, the Empress felt slightly relieved. She hoped that he really had some confidence. At this moment, the Empress was feeling somewhat conflicted. On one hand, Ren Baqian was really too weak. On the other hand, there were all kinds of things in that world that seemed to be able to do anything. She hoped that Ren Baqian could rely on some things to really impress people. Not far away, Tong Xinye was more confident. Previously, he had already instructed Tong Lan to protect Ren Baqian no matter what. Everything else didn't matter. Therefore, he wasn't worried at all. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.